Give them another 2 minutes. Logging in. These are the people who are logging in. Neil Kumar, ISRO, Vinod Kumar, InSpace, और क्या कहते हैं हेगड़े. नाम से नेक्स्ट पेज में है.
It's 11 now.
Good morning and Jai Hind. Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director VIF, eminent discussants who are physically here present and are online, and selected members of the audience. I welcome you all for our first discussion, roundtable discussion, and we are thankful to VIF to make it possible for us with all the eminent discussants who are here to advise ISPA for the way ahead to bring up the space ecosystem in India. Without much ado, I would ask firstly Dr. Arvind Gupta to give his opening address, and thereafter the chairman of ISPA to please speak. Over to you, Dr. Arvind Gupta.
Namaskar and good morning to all. The VIF is very happy to join hands with ISPA to organize this roundtable discussion on the reforms that are happening in India's space sector, and particularly the prospects of the involvement of the private sector in these reforms. I think the government has taken a very big step forward in the last few years. In a couple of years, they have opened up the space sector for private industry participation. I want to acknowledge the presence of many experts here, many people who have been dealing with the space issues for a number of years and have deep knowledge about the sector. Some of them are here physically in the hall, and some have joined us online. And we are looking forward to essentially a brainstorming at this stage as to what does the participation of private sector in the growth of India's space sector involve. What has been done? We can look at that. What needs to be done? That, of course, is very important. And I think specifically from ISPA's point of view, we would welcome suggestions as to how this organization, which has been set up to bring the space industry in India together, how should it perform its role of interacting with the various stakeholders, doing policy advocacy, dealing with the government, giving inputs on policy, and also, of course, preparing the industry, preparing the capabilities, necessary capacities in the space sector. One of the most important aspects, in my view, would be the international cooperation. India is, of course, one of the few countries which has significant capabilities in space, but there are other countries who have also equally significant or even more significant capabilities, and the US comes to my mind, but Russia is also important, Japan, South Korea, there are many other countries. I think there are 70, 80 countries now which have some aspect of space they deal with. So ISPA and which is basically means the private sector, what are the opportunities for the Indian space industry to in not only in the developed part of the world, but there are many aspirations even in the developing part. For instance, Africa, or for instance in South Asia, Latin America. Every country wants to have something to do with space, and space technologies are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. I think Indian space industry should not just be confined only for India, but also, if it has the capabilities, it should look for opportunities abroad. And I would certainly single out South Asia, which is in our neighborhood, very important. We should not neglect that. And also Africa, where we are having a very strong engagement with Africa, which is supported by the government. But these are some of the ideas we can discuss. I think still, I mean, we can talk a lot of ideas, we can talk big, but essentially much will depend upon what are the actual technological, commercial capabilities of the Indian companies. So ISPA is a body of Indian space industry, should tell or create awareness about what are our capabilities. Now, so far, it was ISRO which really dominated the technology scene and still continues to dominate. And I'm sure there are many people here who are familiar. I can see Mr. Hegde, who is formerly from ISRO. Now, what is going to be the ISRO, of course, has over the years has spawned India's many companies in the space sector, and they have developed some very good capabilities. But essentially, they were the contractors, and the companies did the job that they were given. But we have to now develop capabilities, perhaps independent capabilities, sometimes even perhaps in competition with ISRO, in a whole lot of areas, whole lot of technologies, whether it is satellites, whether it is sensors, whether it is all kinds of technologies, you know that. So the Indian space industry would also have to look at the R&D aspect. It will also have to look at the manufacturing aspect, designing aspect. Standards will become very important. And because space is in the outer space is governed by certain international treaties, etc. So the standards and norms, etc., also become very important. And there are also commercial aspects. Ranjana ji is here. She has worked a lot on the liabilities issues. I think these are also. So I think the Indian space industry has to be aware of what are the obligations that it has to undertake when it goes into the international cooperation and also international commerce in space. So I think there are many areas which are important. Then, of course, armed forces are very important stakeholders in space. And with the General Khandare is here and General Bhatt himself, General Sahni and many others. Today, the security challenges are so significant for India and really daunting. And that's because of the technology. So when we talk about the new security environment and India's preparedness, etc., space, cyber, these two technologies come to mind, and they actually work in tandem also. So the needs of the Indian armed forces, and space is a strategic technology. Nobody is going to give it to you. You'll have to develop most of it yourself. Of course, you can have some partnerships and so on, but essentially some critical technologies will have to be developed, and they have to be safe technologies. They have to be usable technologies, and they have to be done very quickly because today the way the turbulence in the world is growing, probably next 10 years are going to be a make or break for this century. So I think there is a need to be quick, fast. So Indian space industry, along with ISRO and others, DRDO is also here. Ranjana is here. Sorry, Ranjana ji, you're also Ranjana, yeah. So DRDO's role, I think this has been one of the major issues that we have had while dealing with the space security. What is the role of DRDO? What is the role of ISRO? And now the space industry also comes in. What is going to be their role? How are we going to divide our roles and responsibilities? I think that is also something that we need to discuss. Now the government has also set up new institutions. You have NSIL and you have InSpace. InSpace, what is going to be the mandate of InSpace? There needs to be some regulation in the industry. So InSpace is going to become something like TRI. I'm not very clear right now what is InSpace. I think Mr. Patil may throw some light on that. I think there's some representation from InSpace also. NSIL is also very important. We used to have Antariksh, which probably still exists in some form or the other, perhaps, but it is going to be wound down and we'll have this NSIL. What are they going to do? And in space, we have seen the DRDO making a very big entry a few years ago with ASAT capabilities. So what role between ISRO, DRDO, and these various sectors, the companies? So I think that's also very important. So I suppose today in space sector, if you look at the whole history of defense reforms, we have been at it for about 20 years. And we are making some progress. I mean, I won't say that we are there where we should be, but we are making some progress. And Jan Patil has been involved in it for a long time. So Khandare has also been involved for a long time. We are making some progress. But space, I think we are just right now beginning. And we don't have 20 years to, catch up. I think we'll have to do whatever we do very fast. So the role of the government and government, academia, industry, this is very important. This is something which has happened in the defense sector as well. But whether we can probably learn from our achievements and failures in that area and avoid them here. Space sector, that from that point of view, is a little bit more compact than the defense, which is much larger and so on. So now we also have these drones coming in, new technologies, which will also, space and drones is very much connected with each other. The other day we were discussing with the Drones Federation of India. They've also got some companies together. So I think there ought to be some synergy between these various bodies so that we can, avoid mistakes and we can also work in synergy and so on. So this meeting is really more like a brainstorming, and we request you to give your ideas as to how, what you think, how the private sector's involvement in space can be facilitated in a quick fashion, in a quick time frame. Because as I said, the time is running out, and the national security challenges are huge, and also the commercial opportunities they will come and disappear very quickly. Now, that is one of our problems. I mean, the way the private space industry has grown in the US, particularly, I mean, it's amazing. Thousands of satellites are owned by just one company, and Starlink played a very big role in bolstering Ukraine's capabilities vis-a-vis Russia. So much so that Russians were probably taken by surprise. And this cyber war, etc., that happened, and communications issues that came up, the Russians were taken by big surprise, and it's the Ukraine which probably did a surprise on Russia. So the importance of the private sector in this war which is going on, which is a very hybrid war actually. I think we should also start thinking. In other words, we'll have to take a broad view of our national security challenges and what role space can play. So space security also becomes important, which is on the defensive side. You'll have to also be make sure that the norms and the protocols to make our space assets safe and secure, they are also there. And then, of course, there's a whole lot of space diplomacy which will go on, in which the government will play a role, but which private sector also will come in. So there is this international dimension which also will have to address. So in space I mean, I was looking at your, objectives and so on. Probably all these factors are included, but the need of the hour is to make structures within the organization so that we start dealing with these multi-faceted issue in a focused manner. So I think it would be necessary for you to come out with discussion papers and so on. And also once ISpA is ready with catalogs and information, then it will be easier for us to deal with the other countries. Otherwise, now if you deal with, let's say, some entity in the US, what are you going to tell them except that some government has taken some view? But I think what is the capacity of our industry? What are their issues, etc.? Those also should be brought forward. So I think we'll have to do a lot of advocacy, not only with the government, but also create awareness for our own people, so that we know what is at stake, what is the potential, etc., and how we are going to do it. And of course, in the end, it is the investment which will matter. One of the issues that has been there in the defense sector is that where is the investment? Where is the investment in R&D? All that has been actually done by the government. Now, can that change in the space sector? Something that we can discuss. So there's some few random thoughts that I have in my mind at this stage. So thank you very much for asking the VIF to be involved, and we'll certainly try and help you to the extent that we can. Thanks, sir. Yeah.
Over to you.
Good morning. I think what Dr. Gupta spoke set me thinking of where to begin. To my mind, for the space sector, although 1968 is when ISRO was sort of put under that organization called ISRO. They started working with industry, and I remember my own company at that point in time, from 71 to be precise, associated with building all kind of things. Let me not just say the flight hardware, but every facility which the country needed, which could have never been brought into this country because of varieties of sanctions, apartheid, whatever we can talk of. Now, each of those came into existence through a sheer collaboration between ISRO and industry. We can talk of capabilities which have been built in. 1.5 decade back, we were talking of hypersonic wind tunnels existing in this country. We are talking of angular motion simulators or the INS qualification going down to On the static side, about 1 arc second accuracies. On the dynamic side, typically about 3-4 arc seconds. Now, every of these capabilities have come in. What we also have seen is a complete independence with respect to strategic materials which are needed for space has happened. Only one aspect which I think did not happen with the ISRO and industry relationship was that amazing research, amazing people, uh, very, very special models. And I keep talking of it quite many times that ISRO found mechanisms within the government system that assets could be created in private sector, R&D could be funded to private sector. I don't see that having happened in any other government sector. Now, this is our past. What did not happen with the ISRO model, and not a matter of criticism, matter of reality, that no system capability with respect to what is required to happen in launching something, or for that matter, monitoring anything and everything which is there in space. Since the sector remained reserved, and let me say the sector remains reserved while we speak. Announcements of opening certainly happened about 1.5, 2 years back, but the policy that requires to back that the sector is open are not yet available, they're yet to be released. The law, which essentially needs to be modified through the Act of Parliament, is a work in progress. It is not yet anywhere close to we can talk about that. By law, do you have an autonomy? You can launch something today, or you can do anything with respect to space assets. Can you take that data below a certain resolution? You are inviting the law enforcement agencies if you ever get into that. Now, this is essentially where overall, if I start looking at the space sector to be, a lot of capabilities, a lot of ideas, but they have not really got into building anything which is divergent with respect to one thinking or one idea of thinking, which essentially is what ISRO has been able to do. Any good things, and we know, again, not a matter of criticism, but one single thinking always leads to not enough of innovation taking place, to a point that if there are better ways and better mechanisms, systemically, some of those ideas, I would say, were not allowed to sort of come up. I think if anyone recognized this to truly, I would say it's the leadership and the political leadership. We know that in 2001, the defense sector opened not for any other reason, but it's a political leadership that believed that enough is enough. We need to now have a sector fully opened up. It's a matter of debate what happened thereafter in terms of 15 years by the time we truly saw. Even today, when in 2021-22, I don't see we really have a perfect level playing field, even in defense. But the fact remains that if there's something that has moved in defense, it's because of the constant discussion, constant dialogue, constant amount of wanting to listen to every stakeholder. And through those discussions, dialogue, we made some amount of progress. As far as space sector is concerned, I think the thinking at the time of conceptually saying that the sector will be open was a threefold. All of us know this, that ISRO to focus only on R&D so that they don't get into every other aspect of the life cycle beyond the R&D and the space exploration and futuristic kind of positioning for the country. But the programs obviously need to be done a little differently, and this balance you actually see in DRDO. There's a research arm and there's a program arm. I date back to the time when there was an RCI and there was a DRDL, and DRDL happened to be the program directorates who actually ran in a mission mode specific programs, and that's how a lot that happened. At the same time, in ISRO, we noticed that every aspect of the, call it the business, right from fundamental research to exploration of the space to provision of let's say services. Everything was under one house. So when the sector opening began, ISRO was supposed to be doing one part of the role. I think what did happen and what all of us in industry have been seeing is the moment there's a disruption, everything comes to a standstill. So we had ISRO doing everything. Now ISRO did not have a mandate. Come to 2020, did not have a mandate to do anything because commercial launching is supposed to be done by NCIL, and NCIL was not existing. InSpace was supposed to be created. I'm a part of InSpace as a member on the board. I know what we have gone through. Unless you are a part of a government department, who starts even making a basic secretarial support to say that something can be done? And that's essentially where today InSpace, so what you asked, is actually part of Department of Space. Ask me, does it make sense? It doesn't. But without that, you can't even begin. And that's exactly where it is. And where it's not supposed to have moved any greatly forward. And this is I would say, self criticism to that extent among all of us, that one would have wanted it to be quite different, because all of us in industry get used to certain amount of speed and pace and making things happen, which obviously doesn't happen within the government system. We obviously have NCIL, which is a typical of our good old days of when the government decides to give out what it owns, there's a PSU creation. Even today in space sector, the creation of PSU private and the level playing field, it's not anywhere in the horizon of people even being considered or thought. Putting all capabilities and everything, to an extent, if a private sector wants a transfer of technology, he has to go to same NCIL. Now, initially, it's just because of the pressure from the national leadership, some of this will happen. But this is not a sustainable model, and this is not how it should move, and that's essentially where things need to be changing. As a result, of course, InSpace currently has a role of being call it the promoter, because now everybody else who is coming up, including all the startups, all the existing about 200 industry ecosystem that exist in the country, I would say the ones who really run it over long years. This ecosystem today works with ISRO, but all of them have a subsystem or a component level capability, and there's no capability. And amazing level of capabilities exist in this country, but not one organization which can do it. Now, every time when ISRO had some of those challenges, the collaboration between the Department of Space and Industry could create any of those kind of capabilities right here. That's because people didn't look at it as a commerce. For an organization of 1.6 lakh crore, 300, 400 crores of business here or there makes no difference for us. We stayed with the sector for 51 years, essentially to start building some of those capabilities that the country can talk and say that we did something. The radars which we talk of in defense, if we talk of a radar which has a single digit accuracy in meters over few thousands of kilometers, welcome to space, you need that. You don't need it in defense. You don't get those kind of separations in defense radars, but that's something which ISRO requires. And that's because you're monitoring multiple objects above, and you need to be monitoring a single digit distances. Now, this is essentially where the capabilities exist, but they have never ever reached anything which would make a business sense to do. And essentially, the opening for all of us truly means that some of this will start happening. Has it happened? The answer is no. But all of us believe that when there's a leadership who says that, yes, let's create it. And I go back to that first meeting with Prime Minister, typically about 1.5 years back, or rather 2 years more or less now, little more than 2 years back. he heard all of us and we said, sir, we don't understand why should a launch take few months? Why should an assembly happen over that kind of time? We have today strategic weapons of our own, which move into place in half an hour. You make them go out into the space, and that's it. If you're ready to that extent, you can finish a launch in less than 1 day. Now, what ability it would provide if those systems are created through the same two launch pads which ISRO has? You can launch virtually unlimited amount of number of space missions in just 1 year. And within the same facility, you don't need the kind of a separation which needs to be done, because existing situation, we actually assemble, fuel, everything on the site. The moment you take it off, the industrial approach to it, bring it, make it vertical, check out your path, the orbit, go. You can make enormous amount of differences to create some of these models, and this is precisely where within the ecosystem there was a need of someone who would facilitate, make provision that every government owned facility, because Dr. Gupta very rightly talked about it, investment. Would you make an investment? Some investments will happen. Would you make those hundreds and thousands of crores of investment without seeing where the business end or the commercial viability of that investment is going to be fulfilled, those conditions? Now, this is where the role, as we see, the sector is evolving. So, InSpace essentially has a role today of call it a facilitator, call it a regulator. Any government facility that exists, authorization to say that it need to be provided, it's bona fide, needs to be done. And that's essentially the role which InSpace right now is performing, including what needs to be done to liability side, what need to be done in terms of actually granting a permission, and then the charges, because anything that you are launching is at somebody else's cost. Government of India is today bearing those launch costs in terms of full cost or the entire life cycle. Because all ground applications thereafter, the entire infrastructure that you use is based on ground, which is essentially ISRO's creation under INSIL or whosoever. Now, each of these obviously mean to be available to be able to control that space asset and to be able to manage it in its space. Now, every that aspect, somebody had to say that yes, it needs to be done for so and so, because what that so and so is bringing in makes sense. It is in a right kind of a direction, and that's essentially where the first of the activities of InSpace, and that's essentially where entire policy side of this whole movement was, I think, the first of the task for ISPA to start talking about. So we are interacting and interacting and interacting and talking to every possible department, every possible stakeholder. Besides, of course, what we are also doing, having been created during that first meeting with the Prime Minister, is that I don't see there's anyone who essentially championed this cause for this industry. So why don't you create your own? And that's essentially was the spark on which, the seed on which ISPA was created. So we created a society, no profit, no loss. As members, you choose your leadership. You keep changing your leadership with respect to time, depending on what happens. Of course, every sector of space, when we talk of, because the visible aspect which we have always seen with respect to ISRO has been the launch having been successful. That's the only visible part, but that's less than 5% of the market. There's iceberg below in the form of where the space touches us any one given day through what we keep doing entire day of our own as a common citizen. If we start looking at now, how are those services going to be made available? How are those services going to be growing? How are those services which will be authorized? They are not even authorized today. So that's essentially where the regulatory framework is, and of course the regulatory framework is the biggest of the issues today, why I said that the sector is not open even today is for a reason. The policy is still being, call it more or less formulated, but it's still in the process of getting approved. Last we all heard that as ISpA is, it's at the level of the EGOM, and after EGOM it goes to the cabinet, and that's where it is. And we were told it should have been out somewhere around April. April we know has come and gone, and so as June. So 1 quarter is a sure short delay. And we also hear that the space bill will be fielded either in this session of Parliament or the winter session of Parliament. Now, till that day, whatever we are speaking have no teeth. It's a wish, it's a very, very idealistic kind of a scenario to bring in private sector, but a private sector cannot today truly do anything in this sector without actually going to ISRO, and that's essentially where I see a synergy which truly can be built. Having worked with DRDO for 37 years, and myself as part of the organization as well as an individual, having worked with literally more than 100 programs of DRDO on the development, the enormous synergies we can see as an industry, where to pick up what to be able to make a business end meet. And that's something which I think is a work which is cut for ourselves, because anything that we see in case of space is as much applicable for the strategic defense. And the strategic defense, we know every entire battlefield transparency, my belief is will move on to space. It just doesn't make space, sense keeping it on the ground and making it much more vulnerable, as long as we are able to find how to guard our assets while in space. If we have an asset up, how do we ensure nobody can hack it? How do we ensure this doesn't become a target? If it does, how do we ensure that we are able to intercept? Now, this is where it's not going to be one sector, and it's going to be a confluence across multiple things that exist in our known domains. The idea is essentially then to put these domains together. And I think we can make sense out of it. So obviously, going forward, this is something which need to be sort of pushed, need to be made to happen. To begin with, of course, once some amount of policy framework exists, it gives us a very clear document to then start finding where to move on, because the baseline would exist, and once baseline is there, you can further improve, modify, change suitably, make things happen. I think as opening remarks, I would wish to stop here. We can freely listen. We were given a task at about a couple of weeks back of projecting our minds to India at the rate of 2047, 100 years of independence. Where do we see the space sector? Today, we are roughly about 2% of the global GDP on space. And primary reason is not a matter of capability gap. I think capability wise, we are as good. Maybe a shade lower, but we could have done far more in space commerce. Now, this space commerce is that small, and we actually projected our own mind, enormous amount of debate, discussion, aspirations. And we thought with what successes India has achieved in the IT and sort of sector which was unregulated for quite some amount of time, except that the IT did not mean any amount of control, because fortunately 1991 reforms ensured that you can keep doing things, and that's the eminence of IT we have seen. If this is what is to be leveraged or something similar to that, and large amount of our data and the subsequent part can draw enormously out of that synergy, we believe we can certainly do anywhere beyond 25% of the global GDP coming 25 years. And that's a vision statement we decided we'll create. With that vision, obviously, we are here, a small association today, and that's where we need VIF. We need every think tank to keep sort of talking about it, because that, I believe, is the only way we'll make our voice reach. It's a very small society otherwise. And as long as we all going to be seeing it in a certain direction, precise details are not going to be relevant. I think the direction is going to be, in this case, far more relevant going forward, to see that we are able to achieve some of what we are aspiring. Thank you so much.
Please load the presentation. Actually, much of my work has been made easier by what our chairman of ISpA has said and outlined, and he has experience of course, working with ISRO for more than 4 decades. Thank you for that, sir. And historically, space has been a strategic sector. That is what it has been told. And developments which triggered from 1940s till date, till the Cold War, it is the Cold War rivalry which resulted in a rocket being fired, a satellite being launched, a man being sent to space, or a man being sent to moon. The new disruption took place only very recently, or maybe the end of previous century. I'll talk of it later. Now go ahead. What happened recently was, and that is around in early 90s, first time USA declared a policy for opening space to the private sector. Many of you would know it, but in actual fact, it is around 2000 when players like Starlink, Virgin Galactic, and others, and many startups started coming into the space domain. But what happened more importantly was the advent of disruptive technologies. Reusable rockets, which have brought the price of launching a rocket 1/5 as on today, smaller satellites, LEO constellations, which were never thought for communication, would lead broadband very soon, or have they already started, as it has happened in the Ukraine war. There has been enhanced commercialization. What all primarily space was used for a few decades back was for maybe the militaries all over, is now more and more used by the private sector. All aspects of it, be it communication, be it remote sensing, be it navigation, as we call it, or PNT, and even SSA after the debris and as the space has become more congested. One very interesting thing is there's a race to join the space by many non-spacefaring nations. Listed today are about 7 spacefaring nations. Previously, we all know 6, which included India, but the 2 which they now talk of is Israel and Iran, which makes it to 7. But 92 countries have some kind of interest, and about 75 have launched at least one satellite. Somebody has launched it for them, but the satellite is owned by them. And in future, in the horizon very nearby is space tourism. The initial phase of that you have seen with the launch by Virgin Galactic, by Blue Origin, and of course, Starlink. And resource extraction from space colonies is what the future is visualizing. How much of time it will take, what disruptive technology will lead to it, one does not know, but it is going to happen. What has happened in India? In India, as Mr. Jayant Patil said, the entire space has been led by ISRO for 60 years and very well. They have evolved from sounding rockets to missions to Moon and Mars, which are really significant achievements for India. Self-reliance has been built up in ISRO's work, and that was probably because of the sanctions which were imposed on us post our peaceful nuclear tests. industry, like has been said, has been primarily suppliers of components, assemblies, sub-assemblies. But yes, that part, the capability is very good in India. The focus, overt focus of ISRO was always on the common man. And they overtly dissociated themselves from military needs. Despite that, all military needs were met by ISRO and were met very well. Now, what has triggered the privatization of space as we see it? One is, of course, it has been triggered by the global trends. And what was happening in India, that the spectrum of activities, what ISRO was looking after, from allocation of frequency bands to sending launch a vehicle or a craft to Mars, was a very, very last minute. And there were certain commercial parts which could easily be given to industry or to the public sector, as it has been done to NSI. What has been mentioned, we are just 2.3 to 2.6% of the global economy, which is $440 billion today. And of course, it was seen by the government that it was an opportunity like IT and pharma. And most importantly, we have a very large talent pool in India, which was going abroad because of lack of opportunities in the space domain in India. Yes, there have been ISRO efforts of capability development, and startups in India started much before the government even declared a policy of privatization. In fact, one example of that is one young man who's sitting here and who will be talking to you. And where did his motivation come from? A lecture by an ISRO professor when he was studying in college, and the university satellites which ISRO has been launching for a number of years. That desire to go into space attracted many young men, and some of them have held on despite a regulatory void, despite issues of finances and everything. And we are very sure they are the ones who, along with our established players, will lead our space revolution. Next. This is just to put in focus the chronology of events. These first startups did emerge in 2012. It was, however, in June 2020 that the government's decision to open space to private players was announced by the Prime Minister, and ISpA was formed. The draft policies on space and remote sensing, two different policies, were also taken out into the open domain. And by the suggestion of the Prime Minister, of course, ISpA was also formed in 2021. One initiative which the armed forces state took earlier, and that goes to the credit of the defense forces, and I think General Khandare was in a way involved in that, and maybe a little myself also, was the creation of DSA. The Defense Space Agency in India was thought of in 2017 and created in 2018. And that would lead all defense requirements, and world over, defense has been the largest user of space. In fact, their DG, AVM Court, is here in person along with us, and we would get an opportunity to listen to him. In February 2020, the government decided this year, 2022, that these 2-3 policies have to be combined together and one policy has to be issued. This draft policy was shared with us, shared with the industry, and we had intimate interactions with the Department of Space. In fact, what we are happy is what the final draft they moved forward, many of the things which we had suggested has gone up. And as we know, it is since April, of course, I've been saying that will be that will come tomorrow, but that tomorrow is just around the corner. I'm optimistic it will happen very soon, maybe this month only. Next. Now for privatization of space, which we are looking in India, these are, I thought, were the essentials. Enabling organizations and structures, light touch policies and regulations, a creation of an ecosystem which required space parks, SEZs, and the two very important things, assured market demands for the industry to be there, and financial support within the industry and from the government. Go ahead. Some of these structures have come up. InSpace is the most critical one, which is responsible to, most importantly, promote, authorize, supervise, and regulate private space in India. Yes, there is a little contradiction that authorization and regulation is being done by the same agency, but as I think we move forward, this thing will be corrected. NSIL is now the private public sector company of ISRO. This is where from everything which ISRO produces will be produced. ISPA as a representative of all industry bodies, and of course DSA, which I have mentioned. These are the critical enabling structures which have come up. Go ahead. Just to flash to you, these are our old established players. They were the ones who were doing large assemblies. In the public sector, it is, apart from NSIL, it is HAL, BEL, and to an extent ECI, and all others as I flashed. Not a very large list. There's a larger number of what the chairman mentioned, which are the MSMEs. Please go to the next slide. And these are our startups. Our startups have taken the challenge of going into the most challenging part of rocket science or space, that is rockets and satellites itself. However, overall, when we see it, the weakness is that in applications, there is much more startups which we would like to have for creation of this ecosystem. Here I would like to even mention that despite the policy not coming, there are many companies in India who have taken a leap of faith of creating infrastructure, be ready for orders as soon as the policy comes out. There is one in Ajista, which is in Ahmedabad, which is ready to make 30 satellites in within a year as the policy comes and as the demand comes. Similarly, a very good structure has been, of course, L&T has it from before, but even Anand Technologies in Bangalore has recently created a lot of infrastructure for this. Go ahead. Please go ahead. Ahead, next. Just to get you a sense of the increase in startups, which is about 101 today. The spike has taken place in 2000 and beyond. Go ahead. This is the kind of money which has come in. This is all right for startups to do their early work, but if they have to seriously go into the business, much more finances would be required. So there's a very positive trend of seed money and venture capitalists investing, but there has to be much more investment in amongst for our startups for them to grow. Next. This is a space tech analysis data, which is they have taken out in 2020. And this is where we stand as per them of about 368 space tech companies. And what is most important is see the figures in US. And of course, we are very well placed in comparison to many other countries. Next. Go to the next one, leave this. These have been the challenges which to a degree continue. regulatory voids, financial challenges, which I was talking of, availability of testing facilities on ground and in space. Some of it is going to be and is being addressed by in space and by the new policies which are going to come. The manpower challenges with startups, with many companies where trained manpower is there, that because of a lack of clarity in the policy today, to sustain such numbers of people is becoming a challenge. And as I said, many of our best youth are going abroad. And the biggest challenge, of course, is assured market demand. And the last GSAT 24, which was launched this month, as ISRO said, was demand driven and not supply driven. Meaning the demand had been placed by Tata's, they bought the entire capacity, and then the satellite was launched. Previously, it used to be supply driven. ISRO used to create a supply, and that the market would demand. Now, this change would be very challenging to handle. We have a successful model in GSAT 24, but for many of remote sensing satellites, many of communication satellites, this would become a big challenge to have a assured demand before it is launched. And that is what the chairman mentioned in some way, that how we have to handle it. Some critical components with dual use restriction still is a problem. And for many where government is making a policy, the challenge is intellectual property rights. Even in IDEX, if someone seriously takes on and creates a technology, the challenge is the IP rights will be with the government, and the scaling up of that by a startup would not be possible. Go ahead. What I have picked here is where some movement has taken place. Regulatory voids, availability of testing facilities, manpower challenges. In this one positive which ISRO has allowed, and is that ISRO scientists after retirement can work as advisors, can help the industry and startups. And many of our startups and industry would be utilizing them. Go ahead. Next. Now, this is my last slide, so to say. It is this change from ISRO-led to an ecosystem which will be public, private, and ISRO, requires a mindset, change in mindset, change in structures, change in the methodology of what we work. And ISRO has to take on itself the role of a facilitator and a mentor for this to grow, for this to come up. Of course, financial investments, like I said, from private and government support are necessary. And for this industry, because of its complexity, will require collaborative partnerships within the industry, and maybe industry and NSIL and ISRO. What is one positive is in space has the new policy, what we understand, in space will be the single window for all private sectors. But a little challenge is, what about other ministries? Because communication is still handled by the Department of Telecommunication. If there is any FDI, it would be handled by another ministry. All those things we expect in space to do for us, and we hope that would happen. Because if again we have to go to all ministries, it's a challenge, and the single window is partial. Go ahead. I just, like Dr. Arvind said, our vision emanates from what was required to create an ecosystem in India. And there were what the Prime Minister said in our inauguration. One is the government has to be an enabler. The industry has to be allowed to innovate. We have to build capability for the future, and space has to be there for the common man. All these four things are what are our guiding principle. Please go ahead to the next slide. And this is what we are our focus areas. And they're quite in sync with what in space also has laid down as its focus areas. And that is why we plan to and we are working in close coordination with ISRO, in space, and NSI. Next. Now I just want to take you far ahead a little to the dreams, which definitely we should have in space. And this emanates from a document which was the future of space in 2060 and the implications for US strategy. This was a number of eminent scientists, academicians, astronomers, and everybody there collected together. And they had a 1 week thought through as to what would 2060 be. They took out the best situation, 8 contingencies, and certain aspects of it. I'll just highlight to you. Maybe some of them are dreams. It would require a technology breakthrough to happen. But this is what the vision is. Go ahead. In human presence, in the lowest form, what will happen is on the left. In the best case, what will happen is on the right. I will highlight what is in the best case in the next slide. Please go to the next slide. And this is what thousands of individuals from many nations will live and work in the low Earth orbit across the cislunar, Moon, and Mars regions. There will be increased human presence in space, which supports civilian, commercial, and military needs and interests. There are one or more crewed bases in the Moon supporting science or economy. There are crewed habitats across the space supporting the overall logistics for space manufacturing, tourism, and resource extraction. There are habitats in the Moon and Mars. Of course, as you would all say, a little towards the dreams, but this is what all of them sat together and said is likely in the best case. Please go to the next slide. In the same domain, what would happen in the commercial part? Go to the next slide, please. Is space would contribute about 10% of the global economy. And major industrial capacity for power, resource extraction, manufacturing will be developed and driven by terrestrial demand, but would happen in space. And of course, space tourism would become a major industry. I leave it here and we'll go ahead from there. And I would, before Satyam comes in for a very short while, go to the next slide, please. This is the technology trends, what it said would happen in 2060. Some of them have already started happening. And that is space launch has become cheaper. They are decreasing satellite bus and subsystem sizes and costs. There's an increased range of satellite bus size capacities. There's an increased presence of cyberspace in all space assets. There are a number of distributed constellations of smaller satellites. But what would take a little more time is on-orbit maneuvering and repairs and other aspects. I'll now hand over to Satyam, who would take you to what is the technology presently existing and what is going to happen.
Thank you very much, sir, for having laid down the canvas for me to now take it ahead. Uh, the topic given for me is technology developments and opportunities in space. While sir has already listed out what the technologies are, but what should be the end state where this technology should lead to is what is important for us to see. And for that, if I may put it, that our vision would be to leverage space for India's prosperity and security, for which our goals would need to make India the world's leading economic power with a developed, prosperous, and digitally enabled society where space domain is ensured to be safe, secure, and freely accessible. And for this, the most important aspect will be that it cannot just be the space industry, but the whole of nation approach that has to be applied to achieve this stated objective. And for that, our mission needs to be to grow a comprehensive grow India as a comprehensive space power to ensure space security, to secure our nation's vital interest, for which we will need to take certain definitive steps to make India a hub of global space power. We will need to leverage on the strengths of both ISRO as well as our industry, which is getting confident day by day and delivering products which meet our national aspirations. There will be a concerted effort required to facilitate our industry and our industrial international cooperation. And the most important thing that will happen is that the limitation of the terrestrial communication networks would get get enabled through the space-based capabilities. So I think that is something what would need to be done. And from what has been covered by General Butt earlier, where he talked about the technologies that are coming up, and study on the US in 2060, how they envisage the space to be. We can also take some lessons out of it and come out with some kind of a strategy that what India should be doing. And in that, I will be talking about it from a dual use perspective, because space is a dual use space. So we could talk about both space security, wherein will come the need for having a credible and a resilient space force for India. It will require us to build a strategic self-reliance in important areas where we are denied technology today. We will need to have built in a deterrence capability in certain areas and superiority in certain niche areas. All this will be possible to be achieved only when we have a robust and agile private space industry, because government has limited resources. So how does that gap get addressed? And that is where the private space industry needs to come in. And we will need to take a very long-term view of it and not just a transactional view about sourcing something from the industry to solve some governance requirement. Now, key challenges are that we have short timelines because adversarial capabilities are already building up, which are challenging our ability to leverage our own capabilities in space. We have a set of, say, reforms which have been put into action, but it's very important that they gather pace to be able to match to the speed that is required to put our industry into definitive action. And it will require a lot of hand holding. Now, some of the key dimensions that I've broken down them into would be, say, remote sensing, launch vehicle and propulsion systems, PNT, position navigation and timing, space situational awareness, geospatial intelligence, ground segment, resource extraction, and mine flight and stations in space. What we envisage is that by 2047, space would become the central aspect of India's digital revolution. We expect that our entire population would be covered by satellite-based, seamless, secure, high-speed broadband available both for enterprise as well as for the public. We would see enhanced utilization of space in areas of governance, IoTs, telemedicine, education, tourism, and enterprise-related work. And we would see large number of constellations coming out from Indian industry to support PNT operations, remote sensing. as well as the government related offensive and defensive capabilities, and not to forget the cyber domain. Now, this aspect I think I already covered. I'll move on. Now, before I take it ahead, there are some unique aspects which we need to understand with respect to the space industry. It's a dual use sector. It requires huge amount of investments. The investments take a long amount of time to materialize. There's a requirement for the industry to be accessing a very critical testing validation facilities, which may be difficult for the industry to support. And I'm glad that both ISRO and DRDO have come up to support the industry in that aspect. And the very important aspect is the risk factor. The risk of failure in this sector is high, and not many people come in to make investments in this sector. So that is also very important. So we may have situations where you could have a single vendor emerging in certain critical areas. Now, when we look at the space innovation and the consumption side, there are certain aspects which have already been covered, but I'll just focus on things which have not been taken out. One of the areas where this can really enable the space industry is when we write our tenders, how are we mandating the use of geospatial technology and space-based technologies for, say, project management, project execution, and monitoring of those. So this is one area if we focus on, I think it will create demand in the sector. The other aspect is IPR protection. There are various schemes within the government like the IDEX scheme or MAKE programs where government support is given for execution of programs. The industry has come out with certain, identified rather certain aspects which have been sensitized to the ministries where they could look at the IPR management in a more, with a more amount of attention so that these aspects get looked out. Then an important aspect is writing the clarity of requirement. Many of our ministries do not have the ability to write down exactly how do they wish to leverage the space-based capability. And once that is written, how to translate it into an engineering requirement, I think there is a gap and that needs to be addressed. And I speak with own experience. So next is important is that when we are developing, say, looking at future, we need to come out with PPP models where government puts its best forward. The industry also comes in, the funding agencies come in. So when we look at it, it needs to be with a long-term sustainability model and not again a small-time transactional model. So this is something which we need to look at. I'll just take an example of a remote sensing sector just to say sensitize as to how different things come into play and how it can be taken advantage of. So the functional aspects from a remote sensing perspective was I need it for detection, identification, measuring and monitoring what's happening on ground, take the data, analyze, understand the patterns and predict, and thereafter use it for management of products, and thereafter use the communication capabilities to take it to the people or make people consume that data. So that's how in a very simple language I have put it. Now, the challenges that come to creating demand are limited budgetary resources. Each ministry has something, but it does not have the resource to fund everything. But in case everybody puts its act together, because it's a common approach, things can be made to work. Domain expertise issues I have already mentioned. Another very important area that comes into play is adoption and absorption. So we need to look at it, and thereafter availability of data, geospatial data availability should increase with the new guidelines which have come into place, but then it still remains a challenge. This is something which many of you are aware. I'll make it ahead. The Gati Shakti program is where I wanted to take the focus on. This is one platform which is being built to enable visibility across departments using multiple layers of data. But then how can we make it better? Now, these are a certain set of capabilities that are available either through space or say even terrestrial resources, underground resources, where this data can be captured from. Now, I've just listed them. It has a major space component in it. Now, this is from a sensor perspective. We are looking at different wavelengths and different resolutions, which with effective processing can help solve civilian problems. Incidentally, these are the requirements are same for the defense. Now, what are we entering into a zone is where governance will have a 5D approach. That means your latitude, longitude, elevation, plus the time aspect, everybody in a common time base, and a contextualization, which will bring standards and thereafter ultimately lead us to convergence for decision making. Now, looking at the military and the civilian requirements, the same set of satellite sensors which you put on ground, if you look at it in the north, that area is interest of defense. Then you come to the oceans, it is of interest to civil and defense both. Hinterland, in some ways, yes, required for security agencies, but majorly for defense. Now, there's the same set of constellations. If we start putting our resources in one separate defense constellation and a civilian constellation, there will be a challenge. But yes, if we bring a commonality in terms of requirements, technology, and execution, there is no, it's just a methodology change how the data is getting consumed or accessed. Similarly, when we have to apply a whole of nation approach, I think we can make a model where the government pools in resources to first initially create the necessary investments to enable the first infrastructure. Once that is done, then we use private sector funding to scale it up and ensure this by providing the right kind of policy environment, which I feel can take us to the next generation. This is a spectrum of the space economy. If you see satellite manufacturing and industry is a very small component as far as the global space economy is concerned. Major focus is on the major resources, the revenue is coming out from the ground equipment and the satellite-based services. This is where India has a very strong IT strength. So the government support is there to initially create the infrastructure in terms of satellite manufacturing and launch industry by supporting the industry, then scaling up and bringing private sector enterprise into making applications which get consumed by masses. In India, we have not created a cycle where a common man is interested and has a hunger for satellite-based data. This approach, when it starts building up and gets into the retail and many other sectors, that will change because we have the markets available here. I like to just end by saying that if we have to use this dual use disruption, we need a dual, the whole of nation approach. We need to coordinate, collaborate in PPP mode. With this, we can enable a 5D environment to bring convergence across spectrums, whether it's government or enterprise, and achieve what we can see in the last line, all those aspects in terms of accountability, return of investments, integration, collaborations can be undertaken. I purposely did not make it technology intensive because I didn't want to throw jargon. I wanted the concept to drill in. Technology we can discuss later. Thank you.
We'll now request Kranti to speak here. And this is a hands-down experience from one of our first startups in India. Yes, definitely. And not only has he will talk to you about his own journey, but he will also tell you about what he thinks can be done ahead for bringing up all the startups which are doing an excellent job. He'll speak about many of them when you speak about it. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the august audience for this opportunity. I think one of the big steps after the policy changes that we've seen is the first set of authorizations that came out from ISpA for us to put objects in space by private space startups. I think 30th of June last week, we've done that milestone with 2 of the companies from India, the startup community, putting their space objects along with ISRO's platform, right? You know, it's creating that experimental platform, allowing us to come in and put it, test it. I think that's a great, incredible journey that is happening right now. I think just taking one step back, I know startup is a word that is used generically, but I think every entrepreneur, right from all the MSMEs who've been set up in India over the last 40 years, are in a way startups. The only thing that changed here is that the Indian government put a definition to startup, which is the Startup India recognition. But at the end of the day, I think we are a part of the larger entrepreneurial ecosystem that had been in place for the last 40 years. It's not a new phenomenon of startups, but it is taking what part of the ecosystem that each of us are targeting and what are we looking at. I think the entrepreneurial journey starts with, either you're building a new technology or you saw a market opportunity and you're building services and systems that can leverage that to create business. I think the ISRO had set that path for entrepreneurs to form, right? Over the last 50 years, what we've seen is that they've created the technology where the technology was not existed. They fought with the systems to bring in things that were restricted for access in India. Now, the second step that they did was let the manufacturing and fabrication happen within the ecosystem, which means that we've created a pool of entrepreneurs in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s who had been servicing the Indian startup ecosystem now and have been the startup ecosystem back then. It's actually the growth that had to be looked at when we're talking about the privatization of the space industry and how we are going to take a step forward. I think both the chairman and the director had mentioned it. It's very crucial in terms of understanding that there are 400 to 800 MSMEs who had been working and providing services to ISRO. They've supported in one form or the other in terms of their growth, right? So I think it is important to understand what had been the difference. What is the new startups trying to bring in and what is the next generation? For a lot of time, as Jayant sir had mentioned about it, they've been fabrication partners. The IP had always been built by ISRO. The satellites that we had seen for the last 60 years, we are not talking about just Indian perspective, but in a global perspective. Even 2019 only had 300 satellites launched a year. And at the end of the day, it was only 2,000 satellites that were launched before the 2010s. Now, each year we are seeing a 2,000 satellites. Last year was 1,800. This year, we've already touched about 1,200 satellites that were launched in the first half of the year. So the change that is happening and why it is happening is something that we have to look at. And the change is now being driven by intellectual property that is being created outside of the space agencies, building on what had the space agencies built. Rockets were not new. Rockets were made by the 5 countries, who excelled and put us on the map of going to space, right? It's the next generation trying to do that incremental change to IP or technology so that they can mass produce them and driving the private industry to buy things. I think a little contradiction to what Wing Commander Satyam said. I think what happened over the last few decades is that ISRO had every department coming and saying, I want a weather satellite, I want AIS data, I want imagery data. And they were trying to work together to create one large satellite which served every of those purposes. The ecosystem now, why we have 2,000 satellites being launched a year, is because they are broken down. We have 150 satellites just doing GNSS, radio reflectometry, and AIS. We're not talking about any imagery in it. And we have imagery satellites which are coming, 100 of them launched by different startups, purely looking at different spectrums of the imagery. We've built cartosats which are, probably 500 to 1,000 crores. We put in because there was a requirement for getting that, accuracy levels of say 25 centimeter GST resolution and 5-meter accuracy. So the greater that they went in, the complex it became because they were trying to solve problems of different industries at the same time. The complexity had increased multifold that it took years to build each satellite. And that had not been just the ISRO way of thinking, but it had been the global way of thinking until the 2010s. It's only now that we are changing the pattern. We're building more smaller and smaller satellites. Of the 2,000 satellites that are being launched, at least 60 to 70% of them are below 600 kgs, which is small satellite domain. All of them are going into low Earth orbit and not geostationary orbit. So the change has started coming in from each of our cartosats being about 625 to 700 kilos to coming down to satellites which are 10 kgs, 5 kgs, 50 kgs, serving various ranges of imagery requirements. Now that brings to the question in terms of the capacity that is rapidly developing across the world. I think it's known that U.S. government has about 1,500 space assets that they've put into space. China has about 500. Russia has about 350. We will say that okay, we have 55 operational space assets or 56 now operational space assets that are owned by the Indian government. Now to take the leap and to mass produce, it is about identifying the next level of commercial development. How do we commercialize the technology? Because ISRO, when they built it, as General Butt had mentioned, we built it as a supply-driven industry. We didn't do it because there was Tata Sky was going to buy a full satellite. We built 64 transponder capacity on each of those platforms. When other companies across the world are building just 8 transponders or 16 transponders, we've gone ahead. We've built more surplus so that we've created that ecosystem where profits didn't matter. Even if there were non-usage of the asset, it was an effort to create that these are systems that can be realized. If someone is going to come up and build technologies, let's create that ecosystem. I think it's a big moment that we should appreciate the effort of what ISRO has done for this country. And it is done together with every partner. At the end of the day, Department of Science and Technology giving what needs to be the meteorological satellites and what kind of data that is required. I think it was very crucial for us to have those INSAT series of satellites. Now, weather prediction itself is a complex one for many of the South Asian countries. And I think Dr. Arvind mentioned about it, how these countries need the support. And we've been providing that support in one way for the South Asian economies in terms of South Asia satellite missions that have been conceptualized. The next step is taking that more aggressively. Right now, in the last decade, we've seen a lot of international momentum in terms of owning space assets. And General Butt mentioned about more countries creating space assets or owning space assets, which is that they're purchasing space assets from the space powers. Now, the enablement of that happened because the private industries in such ecosystems had been moved to that level where they had the IP to build their own satellite buses, and now they are serving countries. I think Vietnam, Indonesia, Oman, all these satellite projects that are coming up, where Thales is building, NEC is building, Airbus is building satellites, is because that ecosystem of the satellite industry, manufacturing industry that happened in those countries had progressed to the level, not just being fabricator, but go into the level of creating that structure and now are servicing. And they're supported by the government. At the end of the day, as much as Exim Bank does the promotion of supporting procurement by other countries of Indian origin goods, we see the same thing coming up from the European banks and the Japanese bank. They sponsor countries like Vietnam and Indonesia to buy satellites from the local industry of those countries. For us, we've stayed up with one thing, which is NSIL has been our commercial arm too, not the industry. So what happened is that where a lot of times, I was saying this the other day, tenders are won before the RFP is out, because the technical description that is written is what makes or breaks who can participate in it. A lot of time, the clout of the private lobby groups has an effect in terms of what is available as a market for commercialization across the world. And an approach that had been always taken by NSIL is the government-to-government approach, where our bureaucracy had been doing the negotiation, while if left to probably the private industry to work its way out, we would probably have seen more companies go out in the market and compete with the Airbuses to actually deliver those satellite solutions. I think that is where we have to come in, moving away from the government-to-government approach towards getting to the space and bringing in that commercial angle to move ahead and do things. And I think, well, I'm trying to be short on time. I think all of us have comments to do. I think we've looked at multiple entities which have been procuring things. Like at the end of the day, it's not looked at Indian Navy procures AIS data from an international vendor, but at the same time, DRDO built its own satellite which was doing AIS data. We have ISRO missions which have secondary payloads as AIS data. But the Directorate General of Lighthouse and Shipping does not buy AIS data from anyone. They set up radars across the country while they get only a limited part of that information. How do we bridge those gaps? 72 radar stations across different coastal areas and getting the same information which could be brought in from the satellites, which we are already procuring as data sets. So the idea is expanding the usage and how the interdepartmentals are already using the same data sets but are not working together. I think that's very important for us to solve the problem. I think the more important one also to be looked at is in terms of the AONs that had been released by Ministry of Defense for satellites. I think about 7,000 crores worth of projects have been at least granted the AON in the last 18 months. What we need to see is how is this going into the private led industry to deliver these solutions? Because I think most of those projects are going to go to NSIL. And then if the path is taken again of a fabrication process rather than an vendor who actually delivers some of those critical components, I think that is the path that should be taken. How do we do it? And the most important one, I think DRDO had been doing that effort, which is they've created the grants that are going to make these satellite propulsion systems. We are one of the, we won a competitive global tender for making satellite solar arrays. Now, the part is when Ministry of Defense is going to procure those satellites from NSIL, can there be free issue of materials from us who had been working with defense because it's defense projects? So that way, what happens is that there's a circular economy that is created by different departments who are trying to encourage the participation of private industry in their own capacities in the space sector to collate that and create the market. The market is there. It is just that you're not seeing it. And I think that is more important to recognize what are the markets, what are the purchases that are done, bifurcate in certain cases to build in more small satellites and bring in that change. Just one more topic I want to meddle with. I think, see, at the end of the day, a Space Act to come in or a Space Bill to come in, I think we've all seen that it is a long drawn process. But we've also seen examples in other industries. Right? I think FinTech and Digital India programs have been phenomenal in terms of the growth and the kind of unicorns that they've created in the last 5 years. I think me and Rohan had been at the Digital India Conclave 2 days ago, where we were discussing with 10 unicorns, along with Rohan also here, who are changing the face of Indian usage of data and providing direct access. So I think it's important to realize that sandbox mechanisms that were created by RBI to facilitate some of these test beds to happen, sandbox mechanisms that are being cultivated by the testing infrastructure schemes that both MOD and the Triforces by themselves are creating for testing new systems. I think those needs to be adopted for faster technology demonstration in the space sector while we not wait for the whole Space Act. And I think one steps as such step had been from ISRO, which is the PSLV orbital experimental module, which is giving us access to space where I don't have to build a satellite. I can put a system, check everything and come back. So I think those approaches have to be fast tracked and more such opportunities should be given. While we wait for the Space Act, we should make our own adventures to actually realize things which are going to be part of that sandbox mechanism. I think that will be a crucial one, and taking forward the initiative from what had been the ISRO and DRDO-led development. How can entrepreneurs, let's not call them startups, MSMEs, the entrepreneurs to actually flourish, make those high-risk appetite bets to deliver solution not just for India, for the global economy. And I think Dr. Arvind clearly pointed out, what we should be targeting is not just the Indian ecosystem, but what we can deliver for South Asia, what we can deliver for Africa. And those are the markets that we should, as a country, we should be targeting with the support of MEA, with the support of ISRO, in making the Indian industry be able to deliver to these markets and make self-sustainability. I'll end it here so that we can hear some more comments. Thank you.
One of our and most important aim for today's exercise was laying till now what has happened is we have laid down what is happening today or what to put you current to the ecosystem which is existing today. But most important part of our roundtable today was to take a 360-degree view from other domains, especially from the strategic community, from diplomats, from DRDO, and from many others. There are a large number who I would be tapping at, but I would start firstly from with Ambassador Arun Kumar, retired, and I would just say that he's a distinguished fellow of VIF and has been an ambassador to many countries, including Israel, France, and United States. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I think this was a fascinating discussion on what has been achieved in India and so far and what more can be done. My comments would focus on a supplementary aspect in terms of while we are trying to achieve various objectives that we've set, and also while we look at reaching out in some ways to markets in South Asia, Africa, Latin America, elsewhere, how do we leverage potential for international cooperation, especially in the private sector? And clearly, ISRO has done a lot of cooperation with government organizations, be it NASA in the US, CNES in France. But how do we also energize cooperation at the private sector level? Because in terms of one of the charts that Lieutenant General Bhatt, you presented, US has the largest number of entities involved, then followed by UK, Germany, and of course, France a little lower down, although France is very strong in the space sector, because in France also it is the public sector and the government agencies that take a lead in a manner similar to India and with some support from private industry. So I'll base my comments on a project I did recently. I did a project focusing on potential for cooperation between India and the US in space in private sector and what could be done. And as has been mentioned, there is new strength in the US in private sector in the area of space, and a lot is happening in India. So the feedback that we saw was that already there is a lot of cooperation at the private sector level between US entities and entities in India, including what has been referred to as startups. And so we should see how we can leverage that further. For instance, in some projects in the US, which are government funded, there is a requirement that up to 60% should be done locally within the US, but 40% can be done from outside. And for a part of that 40%, US entities have reached out to entities in India to partner, therefore recognizing the strengths that are there in India. Therefore, looking ahead, among the things we can explore is, could we look at joint funding, India and US funding, for projects where there is a joint participation of a US and Indian entity? So that's one way of energizing cooperation. The other way to look at it, again, if we just look at the US, is that the US does give funding, and they're trying to do that more and more as they're trying to increase their competitiveness vis-a-vis China for projects in critical and emerging technologies. So there, when they are doing a funding to a US entity, could a part of that funding be earmarked for them to do it also in partnership with an Indian company? If the US is, for example, talking of strategic partnership with India and partnership in critical and emerging technologies. You'd have noticed that in the statement that was issued in May, after the meeting between US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister, a joint statement, there are 2 paragraphs referring to their decision to now kickstart cooperation in critical and emerging technologies. and setting up a mechanism between the national security councils of the two countries to lead that mechanism for promoting cooperation in critical emerging technologies. So that can again give us a way of finding ways to promote collaboration and incentivize cooperation between the US and Indian private sector in space technology. So that's just one example. Building on that model, we can look at what's happening potentially in the UK, Germany, France, and other areas. And certainly, once we have developed further strengths, as has been mentioned by several of the speakers, we can look at what are the offerings we can bring then to strengthen our commercial and other linkages in the developing world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll move forward. Dr. V.K. Dadwal, if you are there, could you please switch on your camera? Dr. Dadwal. Dr. Dadwal is an alumnus of University of Delhi and Indian Agriculture Research Institute. He's been the director of NSRA from 2011 to 16, and presently he is the chair professor of environmental science at NIS. He's done a study on the economic aspects of space, and we would like your views, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this program. And I also heard very, very insightful presentations. I would also like to add, just for the awareness, that I was 2016 to 21 director of the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology. And as of now, there are two hardware built by us went to space and functioned in space. One on PSOM and one CubeSat. Since my entire career in ISRO, about 38 years, was Earth observation. So I would start first from the Earth observation. The Earth observation, the economy and industry is part of the larger geospatial application. And there, the challenge has been the availability of high resolution data to meet the requirement of the local and commercial companies. See, government requires regulatory data of national scale maps. That one can easily do with the many data set. But sub-meter data is still a choke point. The second part is the space technology as such is not one technology. It is a whole range of technologies which has material science, electronics, avionics, aerospace, GIS, communication, antenna, hardware in space, on ground. Now, without IPR, how would the commercial companies, develop IPR and make money and do part? So one of the more, I think, which seriously the companies I would advise is to make partnership wherever there are masters and PhD research program in Indian universities. And just you need to fund one student for 6 months or 1 year and work in those areas, right? So I think that could be one very, very simple model. The other important aspect which I would like to highlight, since it was mentioned that we did a study. So we did a very serious study when I was at IST with the Faculty of Economics and with the Director of Center for Development Studies. What should be the framework, how we should see the actual size of the economy. So it was very clear that many frameworks are not suitable, and our size was coming between, let us say, 4 to a maximum of $5.5 billion or so. But when we are setting aspirations and some number, I would just like to, bring to the attention that this space economy, that large numbers, what you see is because the entire or a substantial money comes from communication satellite, and they are already owned by companies, and they would continue to for many years derive that revenue. So it is not accessible to a newcomer. The second important point what we need to remember is of the whatever $80 billion or $70 billion national space budgets are there, the US would be there, which basically they decide with their programs. Some of them are Artemis, etc., and which go to their companies. The other ones are the ones which are by China. Japan also similarly promotes. So the amount of money available for companies to compete and grab is not that total. I think one should really seriously see what is available for competition. The third important point which I would like to stress is that we are, I'm not sure whether they are here, IISTs our students have promoted companies, and one of them which personally I am very proud of is the SATSHA, which basically provides to banks the geospatial intelligence to decide on loans. So but the principle there is, which is generic, is one has to create new commercial markets. If we just look for government departments look at national scale data. So if you want to do that, I would just reiterate, geospatial and communication are very nice points to enter. Two, you must have your new solutions and IP. Third, you have to create markets which are very large in number, even small in size, because customization and that work is what it will bring. For that to happen, it has been pointed out, but I will reiterate what my earlier friends have said. We need to open geospatial mapping and high resolution to the private parties. Drone is there, but drone are always not for mapping. They may be just for some surveillance and monitoring. To really convert it into that, and the entire geospatial application is now the data on cloud, the access. So the whole point is, would the Indian IT rules accommodate cloud data, high resolution, which obviously resides outside India also, to be used? So there would, I believe, as the things develop, there would be such issues which we need to look at. And the other part which I would like to say to all the companies, that while the communication, ground hardware and geospatial are easy entry point and low hanging fruit, we need to develop technologies. I think my previous friend has already talked of PSM. So we need to, go on developing simple small hardware which would solve that one problem most efficiently. And two, when we have many such solutions, we need to make consortia, we need to make, people need to come together to solve the bigger problem, because the space technology is system size, covers entire gamut and a large number of technologies. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to intervene. I don't really want to make a very long presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dadwal. Thanks a lot. And now I take you to another end, Dr. Siddharth Shekhar, who is here. He's an alumnus of IIT BHU. He's done his MBA at University of Illinois and PhD in marketing from Northwestern University. He is the first director of the doctoral program at ISB. He's also the member of the board of directors of Petronet LNG Limited and International School of Business Management. Over to you.
Thank you, Jill Bhatt. Just a small correction. I just stepped down from my tenure got over at Petronet. I've joined NCDX NEML as a director. So I have heard so many people, and they brought in a lot of different perspectives. I will bring in my own, you can say, business management perspective, particularly marketing angle, because I'm a faculty member of marketing and involved in marketing work plus entrepreneurship related activities. So one is the topic given to me was about branding. So let me put it upfront that branding is very, very important. I mean, most of us here are engineers or people from the hard background area, but it is far more important than we appreciate. If you think about it, if a country's brand is strong outside, then all the companies in the country benefit. So German engineering, all engineering companies benefit, even the average ones are perceived as better. It's ultimately about somebody making a choice in the marketplace that buys your products or services. So that brand matters. And there's this common saying in marketing, if you don't brand yourself, others will. And certainly they are not going to brand you the way it benefits you. Everybody is in it for their own self. And sometimes it is in their interest to brand you incorrectly. So one, this part, if we are focusing on a space sector, we are hoping to have products and services come out of it, and we want to become a global leader in this area, then we cannot afford to just have a casual attitude and let others brand ourselves. We have to systematically, deliberately go out and create a brand position for ourselves, for our nation. Now, I have jotted some quick points. There are basically two broad areas within the space sector. One is relates to technologies and application from space to Earth. The other is space to space. And some of us touched upon the space to space. And when I say space to Earth, it means use of space technologies for solving problems on the for consumers on the Earth. They relate to manufacturing satellites, sending it in space, launching it in space, satellite navigation, satellite television, satellite telecommunication, and so on. In this area, we have a reasonably strong brand supported by decades of excellent work by organizations such as ISRO. We are known as a low cost but high quality service provider. Now, there are limitations here because this brand is not known beyond certain circles. And no matter how we believe intense the competition was, it has not been really intense because there are very few players globally. And we have, the brand wasn't created deliberately. It was a result of decades of work and it happened. Now, as we go forward, as our startups, our companies go out and compete globally, this casual attitude of let the market forces take charge of a brand is not going to work for us. It's not going. Now, about space to space technologies and applications, this is a totally new area. And except for some entities in the US and Europe, we don't see much work, and we are very new. This involves use of technologies in space itself. Some of us mentioned that we want to do mining activities on, for example, other planets, space tourism. By 2060, there was a vision statement or possibilities that may happen. A lot of them involve space to space. So development of products and services in that area is not even being considered, at least in our country, and that could be a huge area. So what should we do then? How should we approach this this whole problem? So again, this comes from a I come from a classic branding paradigm, how it works. I think first we have to identify areas in which we believe we want to be leaders, we want to be considered leaders globally. We have to identify those applications, those technologies carefully. And then we have to use those, and then we have to plan a position. How do we want people to know us? And then using that planned position as an anchor, we'll have to organize our activities. When I say activities, say for example, a seminar, a meeting like this, or a seminar or a talk series, or maybe support to startups, what type of startups to support, how to support them. When we organize all these activities around those anchor position, then slowly and steadily we will achieve that position. Now, one error that people commonly make in branding is they use it as an afterthought. It's not an afterthought. It's an integral part of the value creation process. And something that I was delighted to see in India for the first time when our Prime Minister mentioned citizen-centric governance. So when we talk about things like that, it's essentially we are talking about customer-centric marketing. In this sector also, that is lacking. Many startups would appreciate that. So we have to start backward using design thinking approach with the problems we want to solve, and then work backward and create solutions. There will be many startups, many people doing the work, all of us, you can say, populating this ecosystem through our thoughts, through our actions. But that position has to be the anchor that we want to achieve. Things inconsistent with that, policies inconsistent with that are not going to help. Two quick thoughts at the end that I want to conclude with. One is the government has to play a very strong role in this area. Companies alone cannot do that. And unfortunately, hurdles in this area, hurdles in financing the right companies, hurdles in experimentation with new technologies and application, hurdles in commercializing them, they should be very aggressively removed. Across the globe, throughout history, we have seen the more the hurdles, the less the innovation, and we cannot become a world leader in any area without innovation, period. The government cannot do it alone. Finally, this sector, as some of us have recognized, has far wider consequences than what seems to be the case. For example, if we develop a brand image as a leader in this area, it is fed by, it is a reflection of our strength across many industries. So this position, if successful, will have a spillover effect on many other sectors, and will help to put our India's brand across many other sectors. It will strengthen our national brand overall. So I think this is extremely important. This initiative, I'm excited that we are doing this today. It's a great start. I hope my views are useful to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Now, I would take you to the other end, the most important part, which is the legal part of it. And Dr. Ranjana Kaul, I would hand over to you. And space law, she does as a passion. She's associated at Dua, and what other law practice she does, I'm not going to mention it. But this
basically the bread and butter.
Yeah, that is the bread and butter part, but this is her passion. And she holds a LLM from Institute of Air and Space Law, McGill University, Canada. And she has been mentoring all of our new space startups in India. Over to you.
One which also deserves another hand, which is Digantara.
Yeah.
Which I had advised. But anyway, to get to the aspect of policy and law as two separates. First and foremost, we have spoken this morning. I'm not sure whether the message here is that there is already a new policy about to be announced, or there isn't one, or there needs to be a better policy. I'm not able to understand because many different things have been said. So be that as it may, I'm assuming that there could be a better one. I will focus only on the announcement that the Prime Minister made in 2020 related only to space, meaning activities in outer space, because we have also spoken extensively on space-enabled services, so telecommunications and of course space-to-earth economy, remote sensing, so forth and so forth. So I'm not talking about that because that is not space activities, although derived therefrom. So now here's the thing. We have ground segment and we have space segment. The principal difference in context to law and policy is that the ground segment happens here in our own territory, because terrestrial law is organized on the basis of sovereignty. And outer space activities happen in outer space, which is to say over 100 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. And the organizing principle there is that outer space does not recognize sovereignty, that is, national appropriation by claims of sovereignty, occupation, use, or any other means. That will take you into the domain of space to space, because all this business of space resource mining and colonization and actually habitation of moon is here and now. So be that as it may. What I am seeing here is, how should I deconstruct that word Atmanirbhar in that announcement? Leveraging India's advanced space capabilities. Why are we going to do it? How shall we do it? What is the objective? Come down to that 25-year framework, and I must congratulate you, General, and Arvind also, that for the first time I'm hearing a timeline. But we are ambulating all over nonetheless. So if it is a timeline, what is it that the government or all of you want India to be as a space power? What is it that we want to be? If that is the day, and we have many people from the defense services to think of it as strategy and tactics, how shall we come backwards? D-Day minus 25. What are the milestones that have to be achieved? That needs to be identified. Without precise clarity and simply articulated, unambiguous articulation of a policy with an objective which is clearly identified, I don't think we are going anywhere at all. Second of all, as much as you need a policy, what we are hearing all of us say one way or the other is, how shall we implement it? Necessarily, that policy must be accompanied by a roadmap for implementation. That will again be broken down maybe year by year, because that's how implementation will happen. All these gaps that have been identified, current regulatory laws and framework that are actually an impediment, the connection of all related laws that will go into the making of a successful ground segment activity and therefore outer space. This is important. If we do not do this, it's not going anywhere. It will go on and on and on. And finally, as far as policy, I will say that if there is this passion, and all of us as Indians do, we want to put down 3 pages at least to say all that we have achieved. Yes, we have achieved it. And then we want to say another 1.5 pages to say all that we could be. That is aspirational. It is not policy. So please put that as an accompaniment, background sheet, if you like, for the policy. Policy must be precise. Now let's come to the law. Law specific to conducting activities in outer space. Like I said, it doesn't recognize sovereignty. It's man-made, the UN. And the reason for this is that it happened after Sputnik. Few weeks later, the Americans launched the first ICBM. Space is and will remain forever a military domain. We, commercial space, is sharing space. It is not the other way around. We look at it the other way around, as it happened by default, is because India is the only country that established the National Space Program as a civil space program. That is one, for no other reason. So when you're drafting a space law and a space policy, you have to be mindful of the treaty provisions, Outer Space Treaty, which has many, what should I say, where there are many aspects and gaps which still enable the development of military technologies. And that is the reason why we have to be extremely conversant with the treaties, with international law, with customary international law and its application downstream. Now, when we are talking of space tourism, etc., it is not happening tomorrow, it is happening now. 5G is being unveiled as we speak. Point of the matter is that this is new activity in what is called near space. Near space is identified as above 18 kilometers. That is the highest that a commercial airline flies. And 160 kilometers, which is a practical orbit where a satellite can sustain itself. 120 is where that re-entry happens, and if it's uncontrolled, it explodes and accidents and debris falls, all that. So therefore, this is space to Earth, and it is going to happen now. The first time I was approached by a Swiss company asking me about India's contemplation on how it will go was in 2016. I had no clue what this near space was, honestly. So the point is, it's here and now. I take what Satyam was saying about future. All of you, many of you said about this future. There needs to be one part, maybe not precisely connected with this 25-year, but an adjunct part of what else for the next 25 years. Because without that, you have to connect dots back and forth. The space community, the space activities bill has to be drafted with these aspects in mind. Most importantly, to give you an analogy, because as you can recognize, there's a convergence between airspace and outer space. So there is sovereign law application in airspace, but there, commercial airspace, the military is sharing commercial airspace. And so therefore, in the Chicago Convention, which represents the public international air law, there are caveats for how a nation's air force will defend its sovereign airspace. Up there, it is exactly the opposite. Military, commercial is sharing space. So where you have a proposition like that, it becomes cardinally important to be acutely aware that when you're drafting that space activities bill, you are not putting, extrapolating, paraphrasing in your own words, because you're going to do great harm to our national objective and national interest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anjana Kaul. And more importantly, as this space activity bill comes to the draft, comes to the open domain, we are definitely going to have interactions with you to ensure that we get it right. We are promised in another 2 months. Yes. So the 2017 proposal or draft which was there, that seems to be out off the table now. And a new draft has been created, which they promise us, the Department of Space, that another 2 months they would be circulating the draft to us. We'll wait for that. And definitely they will put it in the open domain before they finally submit it to Parliament.
Between two sessions of Parliament, it will be open for all discussion.
If I may just add to it, because there is this big thing that whatever is the draft, immediately put it out in public domain. That public is international.
Okay. Yeah.
And I have many of my colleagues who are practitioners, but also, abroad professors are also practicing law, etc., unlike here in India. And they send me proposals sent by their students, Indian students studying abroad, tongue in cheek, Ranjana, can you have a look at this proposal and give your views? And when I read it, and I have read, of course, that draft, I always tell them that, I have back-to-back court matters for the next 3 weeks. I'm happy to look at it afterwards. Normally, I escape. How can I comment on it?
I think the point that is being made is when you're making a draft, people should be involved at that stage. Rather than heading over a bad draft, and then you have a draft of 5 pages, 10 pages, and comments of 100 pages. What are you going to do with it?
Last time I was asked, when the space transportation stuff, you can launch from your own space facility or a leased space facility or nicer. I'm asking myself, is Government of India actually planning to declare a private launch operator possibility, or am I going to acquire about 2,000-3,000 acres of land over the next so many years? Then I have no idea what else it requires, no time and this, that, and the other. And then you are going to authorize me after 7-8 months that ठीक है तुम एक launch कर सकती हो. You're talking about the commercial potential. This is what must not be in our drafts. It's aspirational. One day maybe we will.
And Jayant Patil was mentioning, that in the structure, we should be giving inputs for the draft before it comes. But some of them definitely on insurance, liability, on other punishments which are there. Some non-verbal, some communication which has taken place has resulted in them reviewing what would be the policy. But yes, your views or insights now also, we would definitely send it to Department of Space that something better could come from that.
What you're dealing with two private entities in space having a problem. How do they get on with it?
I would now shift to some of our online colleagues who are there. Dr. Hegde, if you are there, if you could switch on the camera, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think at the outset, I would like to profusely thank VIF and ISpA for having given me this opportunity. And 11 onwards this morning, certainly I am more educated. It was very, very informative session. So I was just going through some of the papers available in the public domain. I was just seeing one paper, Industries of the Future, which was promulgated by White House in August 2020. Space being an all-encompassing area, the paper said that the investment should be in areas like artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, quantum science and technologies relating to smartphone, GPS, and MRI devices, navigation tools, and so on, and also 5G and advanced wireless technology and biotechnology. And NASA should invest in all these, support all this to be happening in private industry, academia, research institutes, everywhere, to make space more relevant to the life as well as the society. And I also happened to see the Harvard Business School paper of February 2021, which talked about space for Earth economy, telecom, internet and all, our previous speaker told that, and also space for space economy. See, basically, 95% of the space economy as of 2019-2020 came from space for Earth economy. Now, need of the hour is basically to enable our private industry to quickly focus on the space for Earth economy. Otherwise, to get into really space for space, that is planetary exploration, mining, space tourism, such things would be difficult for our industry to straight away jump into. Now, even the European space policy of 2015, which assessed that space is benefiting in Europe more than 230,000 professionals, both upstream and downstream activities put together. They talked about policy for space, which focuses mainly on promotion of scientific and industrial competitiveness and so on, and also space for policy. How do we plow back the benefits coming in from space into various policies that benefit the space and society? And coming down more practically, they just focused on 5-6 space areas for immediate activity. Say they wanted to have a navigational constitution with 22 operational Galileo satellites. Copernicus giving a lot of input for geospatial services in Europe, space situational awareness, SATCOM, and international cooperation. So basically, we have to really come down to what is most needed for our industry in immediate term, short term, and long term basis. And just two, three more specific points, if I can focus. See, our industry, I was fortunate to be in several UN forums, UN Outer Space Agency, and all. When we told a large number of industries are supporting our program, we got a lot of claps. But our industries, even Prime Minister mentioned the other day, have remained as vendors. They don't have IPR. They don't have product of their own, basically. I mean, by and large, okay. So whether big house or small house is built by the same brick, same cement, same iron, it is necessary right now that the technology transfer, which ISRO is talking, should focus on giving away all the system, subsystem level technology to those industries which were being manufactured by them at practically no cost or nominal cost. Because the moment you want to become a globally competitive industry, the question comes of heritage. You see, it could be an ethnic recipe, but a recipe developed by ISRO or space has to be cooked in several kitchens. Then only, the technology proliferates. Now, coming to startups, most of the startups in India want to make the total satellite. Basically, I mean, to talk in crudest possible word, it is waste of energy. Because the brilliant young minds should focus on developing some disruptive technology or disruptive instrument or disruptive payload and not waste their time on manufacturing bus. See, in the buses, the small sat buses or whatever, I mean, it is somebody else's ball game. What is required ultimately to become an intellectual power in this area is to develop as many disruptive, as many newer payloads, technologies, analytical tools, and that kind. Now, of course, financial support is most important. The way NASA supports, the way ESA supports, they have different approaches. They have a way of handholding industry, startups, academia by way of giving huge grants the moment they see some prospect. You see, for example, the NGI, National Geointelligence Agency in US or National Reconnaissance Organization, they have no taboo to buy or place order for huge quantity of data of millions of dollars with either a running private industry or an upcoming private industry. We have several cases of that. And global technology partnership is a must. See, today, Indian industry, if they want to respond to an RFI or RFP mooted by another country, the first question that comes is heritage. How many similar satellites or equivalent payloads you have in orbit? They don't have. So, technology partnerships and indirectly infusing the heritage component into Indian industry is a must if we have to become a global player. So, I mean, the last point I would like to say that, last but one point, see, our immediate focus could be the low Earth orbit. Basically, the low Earth orbit has become the space economy zone or special economy zone because in the last 10 to 12 years, the total, space for Earth is focused on the LEO orbit. But, one thing to note here, I will take half a minute more. See, we have seen a huge surge of, small satellite vehicles coming up in the last 10, 12 years. About 40 of them got into that. About 13, 14 survived. To launch a small satellite, to say that we require a small launch vehicle is a myth because small launch vehicle can carry one or two quickly. But today, small satellites have taken the shape of constellations once the technology is proven. That is why slight reprioritization of the startup approach, reprioritization of, ISRO's or NSIL's or InSpace approach to encourage industry would be required. And in the current situation, in a way, it is good that the space policy is delayed because so much of good discussion, inputs from think tanks are getting in only now. I hope what comes out also will be further deliberated and further refined and all that. And thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Hegde. Thank you for, we noted what you have said. And I would now ask Mr. Vishnu Chandra, former Deputy Director General and Head Group of Geospatial Technology and Services Division. Dr. Vishnu Chandra, if you are there, could you please switch on your camera?
Yeah,
Over to you, please.
thank you. I extend my thanks to ISpA for inviting me here. And in fact, I superannuated on 30th June. So, and I was quite actively involved in geospatial technology services at NIC. And in fact, my previous speaker, particularly Dr. Dadwal and Satyam, has covered many things. As you know, geospatial is already become a part of, well-embedded part of digital transformation ecosystem. And the entire end-to-end solutions and services of government or governance are getting affected by it. I will cover my points in 4 or 5 points. Some of them has already been touched by previous speaker. One is what we call data and data governance part. So earlier, when we used to talk about end-to-end ecosystem, we used to think that data creation, data survey and mapping was not seamlessly integrated with IT system. Today, what is happening, you are getting data from root real time through various technologies that is seamlessly integrated with IT systems, whether it is a drone, IoT, or CCTV feeds, and so many things. So that is bringing a huge paradigm shift how data governance should happen. In fact, Dr. Dadwal talked about sub-meter level data or large scale mapping data to be allowed to be handled by private sector. And that is a very important recommendation, because even application in PM Gati Shakti, like simple application like ROW management, needs a very large scale geospatial data and services connected with 5G network and real time getting integrated on GIS platform. So that is one part of it. Second part, which is very important, is what they call, it has been touched, the technology part. So different systems and different technology component should interoperate, and the interoperability standards to create systems of systems. And that is very important. Means it has a cloud part, it is a cybersecurity framework, and then at top of it, GIS platform integrated with workflows. When I talk about workflow, then data and technology gets converged. Now, see, what I'm trying to say is, one is data in rest, other is data on move, constantly getting integrated with workflows of the governance system. Now, once data get integrated, then the whole range of encryption, decryption, when data is in rest, and when you call it a particular instance on the workflow, the data, it gets decrypted. Now, all this workflow management and data is getting value added as per the requirement of the workflow for desired delivery of services for a particular solution. Now, that becomes very important. And again, during this process, security technology, cloud, and all these things has to be addressed. So this is technology convergence with data and data services. For third part, which is very important, is what you call different kind of capacity buildings. Involvement of academic, private sector in that is very important. You need to have domain focused capacity building. We are talking in academic institute, the incubation of, say, center of excellence for AI, blockchain, and so many things. But there is no center of excellence which talks about, say, center of excellence for climate change, which looks into technology verticals focused with respect to the particular problem and solution. So ultimately, you need incubation with the help of private sector on ground, where the actual problem has to be handled. Maybe local engineering colleges, academic institute, mentored by IITs may be addressed. So these are the few recommendations which I feel is very important for geospatial application and delivery of services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I would ask Dr. Sudhir Kumar, Director CBPO. I would request if you could switch on your camera, please. And over to you, Dr. Sudhir Kumar. I think your mic is switched off. If you could please check your mic. Dr. Sudhir will wait till the time this problem is resolved. Dr. Binod, if you are there, I would request you to say a few words. Dr. Binod in space. Okay, for the time being, Dr. Ranjana, I'll hand over to you. Is it on? Yes. Mic.
Dr. Bhatt, General Bhatt, is it okay, my voice? Can I
Okay, okay, sir. We can hear you now. And if you give us a minute.
Absolutely no issue.
Okay, Dr. Sudhir, please go. We are waiting for you to speak.
Thank you very much, General Bhatt. JD Patel, sir. Nice of seeing you virtually. Probably, I think I just will not spend much time on giving what is the space ecosystem, because very elderly people talked about the space system. The topic what I was given or chosen is basically how the startup ecosystem would penetrate into the space domain. So that would be the choice of it's not a what you call a choice. It is not an option. It is a compulsory thing now. If we just see the scenario how ISRO has developed as a comparison with the current scenario, ISRO when it is started developing the technologies, the first is the technologies were not available way back to 50 years back. Technologies were huge, satellites were huge, and launch vehicles that are required to be put to put the satellite, heavy satellites again requires heavy technologies. But now, because of miniaturization, Kranti and other people talked about, the launch vehicles have become very sleek. Satellites have become very sleek. Now this will enable many of the let us say either startups or MSMEs to venture into binding and reusable concepts have come, composite materials have come, which will again build in the miniaturization. So this will enable the industry and the academia to think, why can't we go for redesigning the space vehicles? So that penetration is one thing very good. But at the same time, many industries ask me only one question: who is the user? So unless otherwise the downstream they established, it only creates midstream and upstream. Today the question is, there is lot of hidden demand is there. If we take let's say yesterday we were talking about talking with the Ministry of Department of Fisheries, at the same time like ports or urbanization, the requirement adoption of space technology to real applications is huge. The scope is huge. But the question is, who is again the user? If we take example of fisheries, seawater fishery, if a fisherman is there, which they require, they should get connected to the supply chain. The demand is huge. But who will provide this technology? Who will understand this technology? Who will provide this technology? Inland water resources are there. Either it is freelancing or free catchment pits or commercial pits. Commercial pits, no issue. But when there is a some kind of community ponds where fish can be grown, who will take the initiative? So this is a transformation or transition stage. I think we should take. Some policies have to emerge. Somebody should act as a liaison between the government and the users. They should make the policies. And important thing is, it is a scientific appreciation of the technology. The users should be told about the technologies, technology adoption, what kind of technologies are there, which can be adopted to the grassroots level. If you consider the district magistrates or taluk management is the ultimate users, somebody has to go to them. These are all the technologies very easily available. You can adopt to make use of the, let's say, to generate the revenue in your area. So this gap, if it is, because still government is working on it, but I am not telling, but to things to happen in an exponential way, some kind of people who understand the technology, who understand the user. That's what always Chairman ISpA says. Space requires a huge marketing. So this marketing wing has to start. Probably ISPA or somebody, I take the liberty in suggesting them, you have to have a wing where the people should understand the technologies, adoption of these technologies, and users, and ecosystem has to be built. You have to throw these technologies to some kind of startups or academia to develop the tools and apps. These apps should be available to the users in a very easily accessible way, and that should be recognized by the people. Let us say insurance is there, as Daswal sir was telling. Yesterday we had a very nice session at SAT Show. The companies, insurance companies were coming forward. But how many insurance companies have recognized the space technology as the solution provider or the enabler to either distribute the loans or substantiate the loan, let us say, insurance recovery? Whether government recognizes this technology. So these are all some of the things which requires a deliberation. Probably we have to keep all the people, whether it is the Department of let us say expenditure or the Ministry of Finance, should also be let us say apprised of the adoption of technologies to the different sectors, not only this one. That is a horticulture you take. There is a produce at one location. There is a demand at other locations. If you can map well in advance before the yield is, or let's say yield is happened, if you plan a proper logistics, so that the farmer will get due, let us say, revenue for his effort and for his expectation. So this is total mapping has to be done in a very what you call micro level and macro level. I expect that ISPA will play a good role in such kind of things. We are all there giving the, let us say, suggestions or giving the technologies, but this ecosystem is order of the day. Probably the day is not very far in our expectation, and many people we invite either through challenges or through dissemination of this information. Very wide range of, let us say, deliberations like this have to happen. Many allied people are there. They have shared very good their experience. Such a elaborations and such a deliberations, such a brainstormings, collective bargainings have to happen in a very wide scale, so that many people will get to know. The day is not very far. We are with you from the government point of view. Whatever you let us say expect from us, we definitely extend to you. Let us grow together and let us mutually help each other to grow the space ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sudhir Kumar. Thank you. And before I come to Mrs. Ranjana, I would ask AVM Court, because he has to go after this, to please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much for the invitation to be at this event. And it has been an absolutely fascinating morning of learning from this galaxy of very distinguished people from a wide range of different domains. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Bringing the Defense Space Agency and therefore the strategic domain and perspectives as they are visible to us, sitting where we are. I'd just like to share a few perspectives on this. First, looking at the space domain and the transitions and the evolutions that are taking place within it. As a larger picture, I see, not of course taking away from what Dr. Kaul said here about being essentially a military domain now shared with the commercial world. There is in some cases a transition, in some cases a role reversal. If it was the benefits derived and the spin-offs coming from the military exploitation of space that kind of spun off into the commercial and the trade world and to civilians, we now see a larger presence of the civilian or the commercial space sector in space. As we speak today, there are more civilian satellites in space than there are military satellites, and that's set to grow. The other thing is the military itself as a consumer is looking set to derive the benefit of this larger commercial presence in space. In other words, we would also like to benefit from the services and the products that flow from commercial space. Whether it's 5G, whether it is ISR products, there is imagery, there are communication products, the low latency global internet communications coming off something like a LEO constellation. We are up as customers. What needs to be bridged is our security concern. And there again, the private sector has a role to play. So encryption and security are very major concerns for us. If those can be bridged, we are here as major customers for what is to come. A few challenges that I see when you look at the Indian space scenario. Two major things that come to our mind. Yes, we are big players in space. We have been for a long time. But if you look at the statistics and you look at the entire thing, zoom out and see, we are in lag. We are in very major lag. Especially when you compare ourselves with our major adversary, we are hugely in lag. We had one unsuccessful launch last year versus 55 on the other side. He is launching practically once a week or better. What that also means is there is a major differential in capacities. Capabilities we talked of. We have a lot of capabilities. It came out over and over again. Capacities, differential, which is not easy to bridge because it takes decades to bridge. When you look at these two principal aspects, what comes to my mind is there is, from the strategic perspective, a requirement for urgency. Things have to move at a surge pace, and that brings with it its own issues of management. All surge is essentially management of change. It is a transition from one state to another sequentially, which is a transition and management of instability. These are not easy things because we are not used to management of instability. At government level, as well as in the private sector, we're going to have to produce the policies and the procedures and the models through which we can transition through these many states to where we need to be. There needs to be coherence. Coherence will come when we have an apex view, a common apex view. As of now, I believe we lack a common apex view. And that is because of what we have inherited, which is over the years, a development which has taken place in a somewhat fragmented manner, compartmentalized development, many different institutions and entities working on the same things, arriving at relatively similar states of development and progress at the same time, and therefore competing. There is duplication of effort, there is wasteful effort, there is fragmentation leading to different turfs and turf friction, which takes away so much from where we could be. When we talk of urgency, there are special models that need to be developed, which means dismantling, and this was alluded to by one of the earlier speakers. We need dismantling of existing structures before new ones can come up. And that's going to take a lot of will. We're going to have to let go of what has been the anchor of our lives, perhaps for decades, manner in which we've been running business, let go of it and take that leap of faith and build entirely new structures. Otherwise, it's going to be stillborn. We repeat the same things, we'll get the same results. I would like to suggest here, in fact, a change in the meaning of due diligence in governance. it has so far carried a different meaning. I would suggest that due diligence or diligence should be acceleration, getting ahead, staying ahead, maintaining a competitive edge, and getting us to dominance. If our processes are not doing that, then we are not being diligent. So super efficiency or perfection in procedures is a great ideal, but it does not make for movement. Some cautions and some challenges that I foresee. Principal challenges as viewed from my chair. One is HR. Small pool of space expertise and not too much in terms of lateral flows. Largely held in that ISRO ecosystem, now starting to flow out a little bit, but not enough in the country as a whole. There are opportunities there as well, but we do need to see this because unless we can bridge the HR problem, unless we have the people to do what needs to be done, machines can't run themselves. A few cautions. The defense perspective or the military perspective on things truly does not get reflected in policy making. As of today, the number of seminars and webinars and events and functions that I have attended on space in my brief 10 months of being here, there are about at least 24 of them in a number of different bodies. However, the voice or the strategic voice is not today on any major body in governance. Not in the Space Council, not in the Department of Space. I have company. But I think it's a very major thing that needs to be done because, as again Dr. Kaul said at one point, that we need to write it correctly from the word go, ab initio, and not then graft perspectives from different areas onto one. So it's like taking a branch of a lemon tree and grafting it on a mango, and a rose and grafting it on a mango, and imagining that we'll get roses and lemons and mangoes. We won't. It has to be written right from the beginning, so the right people have to be there, and all perspectives that matter needs to be available at the word go. Some oversimplifications we've got to keep ourselves from. While there is great excitement and energy, and there is so much more that can bring, for example, small satellites and things like that, they may not be able to do everything that's required in the military domain. And there'll be things that they will be able to do. And there are, caveats in each of these. So we need to, another thing that Kranta said, about the 72 radars, the reasons are different. Okay, AIS is cooperative transactions. The radars are required for the non-cooperative fellows. Kasab didn't sail on a boat transmitting AIS. Just bringing a perspective to it. So oversimplifications, we have to be a little cautious about. Opportunities. I think the private sector, and this was again mentioned by somebody, needs to help articulate policy and procedure. At one of the earlier conferences, I gave a 4P prescription, for where we need to go. The first P is purpose. Is there a common purpose driving this whole thing? If not, we could be looking in 10 different directions and pulling in different directions. So some common vision, like ISpA, I think, and the Prime Minister's words, for example, are, I think, beautiful takeoff points for a common purpose. Policy has to be framed to meet the requirements of a domain and can't be transferred from domain to domain in the same manner. You have to understand the compulsions of space, the characteristics of the space industry and the space technologies, and write the policy that are amenable to that and make it move in that thing. In a discussion yesterday, it came out that, for example, cyber warfare moves at the speed of light. But the decisions thereon are made with procedures that take 2 to 3 months to get permissions. So we lost the war in the first minute. Third P, procedures. We have historically, we've written brilliant policy from time to time and defeated it with the procedures that were supposed to enable it. If the procedures make it mission impossible, policy is not going anywhere. Fourth P is people. Once again, back to HR. And therein lie huge opportunities to connect the talent pool, and of which we have plenty. But potential is a misleading word, and it can be a disappointing word unless it is enabled. How do we enable? How do we connect the academic to the think tank, to the technocrat, to the lab, to the scientist, and to the military domain. And all of it needs to come together. Skilling. We keep talking about the demographic dividend and the young populations of India. Without skilling, it's a liability. But here we have the requirement for literally millions of people to be skilled at all levels. From a 10+2 to a ITI kind of a graduate, to an engineering graduate, to in every other field, at different levels, different numbers. We'll have to model it sometime. So I think the industry, in space, all of the movers and shakers need to, I think, get together on this. There are a large number of engineering disciplines, as I think Dr. Tadwal said at some point. So the opportunities are huge because we need to develop in a large number of different places. So it's a quantum kind of a leap there. We need to build the models to retain manpower and to rotate it, which means a person from ISRO, for example, today transitions to the industry. He becomes the mentor to a startup or to a company, and therefore his knowledge continues to perpetuate. Similarly, there could be people who are in the defense services who could rotate after that portion is done into industry, and vice versa. How do we manage this lateral flow of expertise between different domains, all within this space thing? Unless we do this and unless we are able to retain expertise we are creating in country from just being poached and taken outside. So these models are some of the opportunities I think that we have ahead of us to build. There are niche technologies and R&D opportunities there. Chip, we don't have one. Metallurgy, there are many areas in which we've fallen behind. Civil engineering, we were fantastic at one time. Today we are not. The Chinese built a bridge from island to island across 30 miles of sea in a matter of months or a few years. I think now these niche areas, as someone mentioned, Dr. Gupta mentioned in his introductory remarks, that we have to build our own technology. No one is going to give it to us. And we've done it. We've done it against sanctions regimes. But we need to break these things because as a military person, as a warfighter, every dependency is a vulnerability. And we are extremely sensitive to vulnerabilities. We don't like them. So at a national level, we need to have a purpose-driven, focused, well-funded R&D to get into these niche technologies and get out ahead and be leaders there. Huge opportunities in the ground segment. We tend to think of space as rocketry and satellite. But the true gold is to be got through what we process on the ground. And there, the investments are not large. The talent pool is available in the country. And whether we are able to do the post-processing well and get the applications that can be derived out of the data flows that come from space, I think there is a whole gold mine waiting to be tapped there at lower cost, and which will involve a huge number of people and create opportunity. To just conclude, I'd like to leave the audience with 3 visuals. One is an elephant, and is surrounded by the 6 blind men of Hindustan. The fragmented view. That's a black demo of a visual, and that's something that we ought to be extremely acutely aware of and prevent from happening. So I'd like to introduce a 7th person there who's zoomed out and has eyes, and he can see the whole elephant the way it is. The second visual is that of a mother and child. They say that if you want a healthy child, look after the mother. So if you want a brilliant child from space, we need to look after the environment. The third visual I'd like to leave everybody with is that of a water skier. There's a boat, bright sunny day, and there's a water skier on it. Everything is in motion. Let's first understand and accept that it is in motion. Our choice is not whether to not be in motion, or our choice is only whether we want to be in the boat and steering stuff, or we are the ones who are being dragged by the boat. Where do we want to be? Thank you.
Dr. Vinod is now the director of ISpA, newly formed ISpA, and over to you, Dr. Vinod.
Yeah. Namaste to all. Respected Dr. Arvind Gupta ji, Director, Vivekanand Foundation, Chairman ISpA, Sri Jayant Patil ji, and Lieutenant General Bhatt Sahab, and my dear friends and colleagues. I really thank the organization for giving me opportunity to talk to this august audience. I think most of the points are covered already, but I will certainly give my view in next 3 to 5 minutes. The one model which I am seeing last 2-3 years is the demand-driven model. So it's really a very good step from the government of India that there should be a demand, then only you should launch. This model, for this model to be successful, we need to create a demand. Now, to create this demand, there are the many things. There's a huge potential in space applications, and which we feel, which rightly said by Prime Minister also, that common man doesn't know that how much space technology is used in their life. They may be watching TV, but they don't know that how the signal is coming. So our purpose should be to take the space technology to masses, explain them. There are the many applications in the space applications sector, which the global strategy also telling that 70 to 80% lies in this sector. So let it be a providing the registry to the people. They can online see the development in their area. Be it the navigation like Google and maps, we can use indigenous satellites and use them as a chip and use them for navigation. There are a huge, huge application area which we should take to the masses and create the demand. So then what will happen that certainly there will be a requirement for more satellites like internet from LEO orbit. We are not there still. So we should use and tap that NGSO potential. Now, as rightly said by the previous speaker, that our policy, the decision making is really taking more time than the implementation. I understand that Indian industry is waiting for the policy, and which I'm sure the government of India is working on this, and this will also come. So another thing will be for to increase the market share of India in the space economy is the quick decision making. That should be the another, so that our share increases in the global space industry. You see, I was talking yesterday to Blue Horizon team. They have created new avenue for the space tourism, and they want to come to India. One of the idea which they have is orbital reef. They are building a platform in space where you can grow plants, crops. That's a very good idea. So like this idea should be created, and we should create the space force of by taking this to the masses, taking to the school, including the innovative curriculums in the school and college level, which INSpace has already taken a step in this direction, and we are formulating the syllabus on all these lines. I will say one of the challenge remains is the cost of the satellite. Nowadays, there are the technologies wherein you can increase the payload capacity and reduce the housekeeping mass. Generally, 60-40 used to be ratio earlier. Now there are the global companies, they have used electric propulsion and they have used the less housekeeping mass. So it has become reverse. You can fly 60% plus payload and 35 to 40% will be the mass. So such things with the help of using the modern technology, space robotics, we can certainly reduce the mass of the satellite. This we have demonstrated, and before joining INSpace, I prepared a report and one proposal is already given. So there is a way where you use 16 thrusters and you use a large LAM engine with the help of 2 electric propulsion thrusters of 300 Newton capacity, you can do all the operations. So such kind of things should be implemented in our space industry. So this will reduce the launch cost, increase the payload mass, and these are the certain ideas which we should implement. And if we improve our decision making. I'm sure that India will have a larger share. One more important thing I would like to say, the integration of IT and space technology together will add a new dimension to it. That's all for today. Thank you for much. Thank you so much for giving me opportunity. Namaste to all.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod. And now are the last three speakers, and all have 1.5 minutes each. Ma'am Ranjana, and then I would ask Jan Khandare to please speak. And for 30 seconds, I'll ask Rohan to tell us the story of a startup which has now become a major company in India. So firstly, over to you.
Yeah, I think last but the most important part I would like to bring out, we had titled this, India Space Vision, Deliberating Actionable Strategies. Now, many of them have come out actually to promote industry, entrepreneurial initiatives, and policy level decisions. But something which is very important, and what Dr. Patil also mentioned, how we have moved from simple technology demonstrators to the program mode in a very, very systematic way by developing subcomponents, components, and then coming to subsystems, and then making a system. Now, there was a lot of commonality of cause in making bigger systems and then moving to the program modes. In a program, if you have 10 items to be made, there are 90% which become common. And that is what we thought, that standardization is something which is to be thought upfront in the area of the space to grow. And without that, it is not possible. Now, the standardized components could be in mechanical, could be in electrical, could be in electronics. It is a lot which is going on in most of those things. And I think ISRO has also set a lot of benchmarks in doing that. Not only the standardizations, they have also been following a lot of standards. Coming to the area where, which is the world's order today, that is a software. Today, the designs are software intensive. And if you make the designs which are very, very software intensive, they are reusable designs. Now, who is going to hold on to this repository? Who is going to share this repository with each other in the entire ecosystem? Those are certain points. In fact, we envisaged a software repository within our circles so that people can reuse that kind of a repository. This is something which is going to be a greater value addition, or I would say it will be a multiplication of the forces. Coming to the AI, so a lot of people talked about the cyber and space in the same breath, but we do take care of AI, because AI is going to be the main player. If you are doing a target detection or geospatial activity from the satellite, the AI is going to be the mainstay. And today AI models are being shared, but the AI data which is going to train these AI models, can we not benchmark them? Can we not share them among the various stakeholders? Now, what is it that we are going to think about it? There are a lot of standards today. If you, as a part of the study that I do, we do have a lot of data which is coming in, and people are using it to train it. And as we look at China or US, they are bringing out standards one over the other. Are we really seriously looking at the standards? NASA, I follow a lot of NASA standards as part of my profession, and there are almost more than 200 standards on their website rightly available for anybody to refer to who is taking that kind of an initiative. For every single component, subcomponent, integration, there are standards available. Are we taking that initiative? Today, okay, those are the NASA standards for the space applications, the 5G standards, the AI standards, the data standards. They are daily being pumped in, because whosoever brings the standards actually has a major market share. Where are we looking into those kind of aspects? So we need to quickly look into these standards as well as the standardization aspects very, very seriously. These are the bread and butter. These are the oiling things which will bring out the, the brand building, what he talked about. If you have good standardization, if you have standards, your brand automatically builds. And it's one of the key driving factors. So I think my suggestion would be to very serious look into bringing out a framework where you can build these standards in a very consortia way, which is applicable to everyone and reusable by everyone. In fact, there are a lot of other things, but a lot of things have been said by most of things. This was something which was not talked about, but some one point I would like about vision at 2060. Where are we imagining? We imagine reusable rockets. If you observe, it is only stage 1 reusable rockets. Did we think about stage 2 reusable rockets? Not yet. So are we thinking about the unthinkable, which people have not driving us to think about? So we are forced to think in the direction where the world is going or US is thinking. Are we thinking slightly better or slightly away from what is being forced into our thought processes? So we need to have some brainstorming, maybe the people who are aware of the technical domains, to think about something more unthinkable and take initiatives in a very consortia way. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And Del Khandare, sir. Okay. Since you said 1.5 minutes, that is by my watch. Okay. Okay. Firstly, I was very happy to hear many things here. But although ISpA, VIF, compliments to you for holding this session, but when it comes to the security sector, such sessions will not serve the purpose. I think we'll have to have a closer roundtable discussion in which we will have to go into more granular details. It's extremely good to look at 2047 or 2060. We have started this change now, and like you correctly said, just 3.5 years back, when DSA was conceived, and then 3 years actually is just completed last month. So while I am wanting to go to space, but let me first start taking a jump. It's nowhere there. This change management will have to be done in a more granular manner. It can't be done in a visionary manner. The vision is there, but the journey has to start from the first small step, and that is where we are still stumbling. Why are we stumbling? Earlier, it was very simple. We used to tell ISRO that, look, I want an image of this particular resolution. I want it with a revisit of this, and how many satellites he used to design, what orbit he used to look at, whether it was EO, IR, that was up to him. Now, DSA has a challenge where he has to design it himself. What kind of capabilities have been developed by DSA in the last 3 years? And what capability does he need to have in the next 40, 50 years? Is the present system of selection of people for DSA the most appropriate one? Or are we looking at selecting generalists and then trying to make them specialists? That HR part also needs to undergo a major change. What Kranti said is something which again deserves a lot of deliberation. When we look at what kind of satellites were we saddled with, I'm saying saddled with, I'm making a very clear description, because it was easy for ISRO to launch a big satellite of 1,000 kgs or 600 or 700 kgs lasting for 10 years. In these 10 years, you lost 3 to 4 technological cycles. And you are saddled with the same technology that should have gone out of the window in the last about 7 to 8 years. So that is the reason why when Kranti says smaller satellites, the inference is that there will be more satellites, there will be denser constellations, there will be better payloads, there will be smarter use of data, AI, quantum computing, and blockchain to ensure that the results at the ground station, which Khoth said, getting the gold out of it. So the entire system, the entire approach has to undergo a change. Now, when you're looking at this entire change, then comes the issue. Again, I want to look at what Kranti said. He said circular economy. I'll go 2 steps beyond that, Kranti. Circular economy with a vertical attitude with an individual approach. That's what exactly is there. And that's what Khoth also said, that unless we look at the entire ecosystem holistically, And if General Bhatt, you remember, I had said in one of the meetings, the entire government, the whole of government, when we talk of it, and whole of nation we talk of it, we need to map out what is the demand. Unless we put it in economical terms, we will never be able to get our budgets right. We will never be able to get our assets right. I think this is the job of a professional agency. Maybe a consultancy will have to be tasked to get to all the ministries to map out what is your current demand, what is your futuristic demand, and that is when the audit will take place, because each ministry is spending. But there is a lot which is going unaccounted for. And that particular capacity, if it was Mr. J.D. Patil, he would have calculated cost to company. But when it comes to cost to nation, there is no such calculation. And that is where level playing field for public and private sector, which we've been saying again and again, that will have to be mapped out. And that is where the optimization and monetization has to be done. Ambassador Arun Singh mentioned about the diplomacy part. I'm giving you a live example. The satellites are going over Africa, they're going over Southeast Asia, but are we monetizing this? We are not. And that's what is going waste. So even if your life is actually being utilized for mapping, say, for remote sensing of the armed forces over China and Pakistan, and by the other ministries over the Indian landmass, what about the balanced journey? Your Ola and Uber is going empty, which you should have been utilizing for these many years. ASEAN desires a particular satellite, we say, okay, we'll do it. They desire a ground station, say in Vietnam or somewhere, we say, fine. But what about the end result of that? That monetization is not happening. And that is where the entire thing will have to undergo a change. And unless we work out on each step at a time, again, the whole exercise is bound to fail if we do not work out every small step which is connected to the next step, which is connected to the step to the right or to the left. I just wanted to mention these few things, otherwise most of the things have been covered. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And definitely what you say that within the, and that is why we have slightly steered away from the defense requirements, because they have to be done in-house and a more closer group. And certain steps which we have now started with your initiative and we are carrying out in MOD, we have to take it much further. I take your point on that. And the second issue which you say of monetization, identification of demand from other ministries, I believe in 2017 this was started by the Prime Minister as a direction to all ministries, but it did not take off. The scientific secretary, the scientific advisor to the PM, presently is on exercise on this. We are going to get connected with it. I hope we are able to take that forward. It's a very major exercise, which ISPA with its present capacities in finances and manpower cannot do it. We will have to take other stakeholders, but definitely we see your point. It will need to be done at some time. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your input. And Rohan, I want him to just tell us about how this startup became a big company and that too in space.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll not take much time at all. Thank you, General Bhatt, for giving me the opportunity. See, MapIndia was started 27 years ago by my parents, two engineers from IIT Roorkee and BITS Pilani, with this simple mission that, look, digital maps and technologies can have infinite use cases. There were no digital maps available in India at that time. So they felt it will take them 10 long years to map out the country, which we have done now. I mean, 8 lakh villages and rural habitations, 8,000 towns, 6.6 million road kilometers, completely covered the country. Their purpose was simple. They wanted India to be at the front of the world. They didn't want India to be behind. That gave them enough conviction, commitment, passion, as well as resilience, that even if it takes 25 long years, they will keep at this job. To the point where, last year we were able to go IPO with a 155 times subscription, became a geospatial unicorn in the public market. I think that was a very interesting rather than a private market. But more than that, we have served thousands of use cases for large enterprises, whether on planning, strategy, execution, monitoring, optimization, using maps and digital technologies. And so what the charter I've taken on is how do we now apply this or work with the defense and security so that we can be Atmanirbhar as a country. We are quite open. We believe our maps and technologies can be used very, very nicely in an Atmanirbhar way by all the tri services, security, intelligence, by the country, for the country. And we are quite willing to do it the way that the security needs of the country needs. We want to be guided what is to be done, and we'd be happy to serve the nation. I mean, this is what drives us beyond just the money and the economy. And I really like the point. These are small things. These are not big ticket items. These are small changes that can make big impact. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rohan. ADG military survey, and we'll give you half a minute.
Yes, I think probably I can just say thank you. So I'll begin with saying thank you, sir. A lot of aspects have been brought out. Since being from the geospatial community, I'll just like to focus on existing technologies, whatever is there. For example, we have the IRNSS. Now, IRNSS was launched so that the country has a self-reliance as far as navigation is concerned. But we all know that a lot of things, miles have to go as far as the navigation technology itself is concerned. We are still dependent on the GPS system of US, GLONASS, Galileo, etc. We have already suffered at the hands of US during Kargil war through selective availability, where they had put us off by 200 meters. Even though IRNSS has been in place, like somebody had just brought out, that we don't have the technology to develop the chipset. So while we are focusing on the space part, let's also focus on the ground part, where we have the chipsets developed, the applications developed. We need to ensure that each and every cell phone manufacturer in India has got an IRNS chipset, so that even if somebody else switches off his service tomorrow, it doesn't affect us at all. That is applicable for the defense community, but even beyond that, even for any kind of navigation, it would be necessary. At this point, sir, in 2002, Beidou just started off, and within a span of 20 years, they have got 36 satellites. In fact, they are bigger than the GPS constellation in this world. Today, 120 countries are subscribing to Beidou. Beidou is coming as a package in each and every navigation system we buy. In fact, whatever handle GPS or even our smart watches which we are using, it is all there. You cannot switch it off. You can switch it off in some of the systems. Tomorrow, there may be a time when China would bring any cell phone, any phones or any smart watches which have got chipsets manufactured in China. Other than Beidou, it won't be accessing anything. So we may again be left high and dry what we were about 20 years back. So my point is, basically, once we are talking about the space part, we should also focus on the ground part, where we can develop the applications and chipset and maybe more. I had few things more, sir. I think once we have that defense component, defense seminar, we'll discuss that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You wanted to say something? Okay. You can say thank you. Quickly.
So, good afternoon to all. This is Bharat from Ajista. So one thing I want to mention is everyone was talking about vision, mission and all. So one thing that could help the industry is something like a decadal plan from different organizations, or a 10-year plan maybe from ISRO, a 10-year plan from DRDO, a 10-year space-related plans from the DSA or other armed forces or tri-services. So that would give a sort of a roadmap for us, like what technology that we have to invest in. So that would be a great opportunity. That is one thing I would like to say. The second thing is, as DSA, DG Court was saying, a leap of faith is required, sir. I mean, it's not possible to launch 1, 2 satellites every year and think that soon that, okay, we will catch up. But yeah, we are never going to catch up in that scenario. We have to go maybe something like a tranche one scenario, take the risk, or bring in like collaboration with the industry and the services and the DPSUs, go for a constellation, maybe for PNT resilience or maybe for communication or imagery, and go ahead. So that's what I would like to say. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. We would end the session here, and I would request Dr. Arvind Gupta to please give his closing remarks.
Truly, thank you, remark. 30 seconds. We have heard a lot of wonderful ideas. I think this kind of ideation would not have been possible had a few years ago we not said that let private sector come in. I mean, I've seen many discussions on space, but it was all ISRO, space security, few defense, and so on. But now the fact that so many youngsters are also contributing, so that's a great thing. I think it's very difficult to summarize a very rich discussion. So I hope that ISPA will take it forward in its various ways. But one thing I want to say, you know, looking at how the governments function, and this is inbuilt in the government, let us not expect miracles, that you will have a perfect space policy or you will have very quickly. Of course, the leadership is positive, that's why these things are happening. So whatever ISPA or anybody else does will have to be done in this imperfect world. And the fact that there are so many opportunities in India and abroad, and Map My India, I remember having visited one of your stalls in some exhibition many years ago. I think Satyam had arranged at that point of time. And we were discussing the geospatial, and we were seeing how even to get one map, it requires 18 clearances from the government. And in fact, you are now talking about sharing with the private sector. It was the armed forces who were really coming in the way of, liberalizing the policies, and Ministry of Home Affairs and so on. So I think the attitudes have to change. So despite the fact that there are many constraints, we will need to work. And one point which I think excellent point Ranjana made, and that is about standards. Without standards, forget about strategic technologies, you will only be vendors essentially to somebody or the other. So standards, R&D, these things go together. And of course, we have seen in defense all the time, the industry says, let the orders come, then we'll see. So industry is not spending in R&D. So I think R&D, standards, etc. These are the areas which should, despite the constraints, the industry will have to find its resources for that. So I think I want to thank ISPA, and we'll continue with this. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone else who joined.
A big thank you to all of you for having taken out your valuable time to share your thoughts, which are definitely thought-provoking. And I'm sure that everybody who's present in this room is going back energized and inspired to do something which will strengthen the present pace that has gripped the space sector, I would say. And especially in the defense space, there's a lot of work where ISPA is very deeply involved. This event would not have been possible without the guidance of Dr. Arvind Gupta. In fact, he's the one who suggested to us that we should move in this direction, and I'm very happy that that guidance which he gave a few months back, today we have taken the first step, and I would say that this would continue in many phases where we would take a deeper look at the issues that have been identified and take it to some actionable outcomes. May I please request Director General ISPA to give a small memento to Dr. Arvind Gupta, sir. May I request Arvind Gupta, sir, to please hand over the mementos to our speaker guest, sir. May I request General Khandari, sir, to please come on the stage. Yes, sir. Fast forward mode, sir. May I request Ambassador Arun Singh, please come on the stage. May I request Dr. Ranjana, please come on the stage. May I request Dr. Ranjana Kaul ma'am to please come on the stage. May I please request AVM Khoth to please come on the stage. May I please request Dr. Siddharth to please come on the stage. May I request Mr. Rohan to please come on the stage. And may I request our young Kranti, the one-man thinker of space. Sir, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Satyan, thanks a lot.
So we missed one brigadier. Arun, sir, sorry, my mistake. Please come, please come.
Still make it bigger.
Yes.
So, lunch and
Ladies and gentlemen, please have lunch and go. It's waiting and I think richly deserved today.